Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1393 of the War News stream. And we have some wild news tonight. We've seen that Putin has threatened NATO leaders directly today and has attacked them and called them swine today. Also, Russia has sealed off their entire major Black Sea Fleet port in Novorossyisk in a huge embarrassment. And Venezuela is now in the act of confronting U.S. naval vessels right off their coast. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, everyone, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world as we have major developments and information from every single corner of the globe. All the way from the hunt for Captain Crack Sparrow to the port in Novorossyisk, it appears that things are going quite interestingly today. And of course, to give you all a little bit of a summary of what we're going to be talking about tonight, we have been able to hear that the Russian Black Sea Fleet is now no longer the Black Sea Fleet. It will now be called from this point forward the Black Lagoon Fleet, as it has now been trapped inside of a small port, the Vostochny Rayon, within the port of Novorossiysk, due to the Russian Federation being so scared of further losses and damage to their fleet that they have now taken several caissons and sank them in front of the only entrance outside of the naval port. This now leaves the entirety of the Black Sea Fleet trapped within a small lagoon within the port and completely impossible or impervious to at least Ukrainian submarine drones. Nevertheless, it pretty much means that the Russian Black Sea Fleet has now been completely abandoned as a usable asset in the conflict, and if it conducts any actions, it will be conducting these actions from the Vostochny Rayon only, and no other time or no other place rather than then and there. Outside of that, we have also been able to hear that the Venezuelans are apparently going to be planning to confront the United States Navy and the now existent blockade that is ongoing off of the coast of Venezuela within international waters. Currently, whoa, what a voice crack. Speaking of voice cracks, I think Maduro's getting a little shaky as well. But on Flight Radar 24, we are currently observing the flight of several U.S. Navy aircraft, including some Growlers and also some Super Hornets that are currently flying in the area of the Eastern Caribbean within the NOTAM zone around the area of the nation of Venezuela. Venezuela. Currently, we do understand that there has been significant military movements over the course of the day, but it does not appear that there is a possibility of strikes happening any more so today than most other days. Still, the Venezuelan government did announce that they will be attempting to break the U.S. blockade by escorting oil tankers in and out of the U.S. blockade with their very own warships. This pretty much guarantees that there is going to be a direct firefight that happens between the U.S. Navy and that of the Venezuelan Navy here within the near future, which will finally start the shooting battle that will start a larger conflict or war between the two nations once that engagement begins. Nevertheless, the United States of America has been hearing from Mexico and Brazil words of de-escalation, wishing to see that the conflict will be avoided. At the same time, at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, several flights of F-22 Raptors, we're assuming over 12, have taken off and flown into the night, off somewhere into the Atlantic, either towards the area of the Eastern Caribbean or heading towards CENTCOM or EUCOM. We're not entirely sure. We have also heard a great deal of statements out of the U.S. government over the course of the day, but nothing pales in comparison to the statements we've gotten out of the Russian government today. We have heard the Russian government claim that 1, European leaders are swine, 2, the West has absolutely no culture or civilization, and 3, they also would like to see that the West is destroyed outright, and that they will achieve their territorial aims in Ukraine whether or not anyone wants to compromise with them, which means accepting their demands unconditionally. We've also heard that at the same time, Russian oil prices per barrel have reached a record low. They have never been lower historically than they are today. So if you're in the business of buying oil, I would never recommend buying Russian oil, but it does appear that it is quite cheap today. Meanwhile, the Thailand-Cambodia war is still raging along the border areas. And while the United States is now acting like this is not going on and simply does not exist, it does appear that the Royal Thai Army is clearly showing that it does exist. The Thai Army was able to conduct an offensive today and took the Praset Takwai Temple directly along the Thailand-Cambodia border, while at the same time we also get to see further border clashes happening from the Cambodian perspective, once again within the Surin region. We've also seen additional details that the Cambodians apparently counterattacked within the Trot region and were able to take some limited amounts of small arms munitions and also some small numbers of M4 carbines from the Royal Thai Army in the midst of the counterattack. At the moment, that is still an ongoing battle. The Chinese have also been publicly shown to be training Cambodian armed forces, which isn't really giving us a lot of faith that the Chinese army is trained too well because, I mean, have y'all seen the Cambodian army? I mean, it's not really like they're doing all too well. Meanwhile, the United States did approve $11 billion in arms support to the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan, which will help them to assist and once again aid themselves in a resistance to an invasion by the Communist Chinese from the mainland. Meanwhile, we have also been able to hear of further developments in the ongoing war in Ukraine, as the Ukrainian armed forces have been able to inflict significant losses onto the Russian Federation's armed forces once again over the course of the day. The Russians, however, in Moscow, specifically Gerasimov, has actually claimed that not a single inch of ground has been made by the Ukrainians in Kupyansk, which just liberated the entire city several days ago, and Gerasimov has stated that the Russians are succeeding in holding the city, and that the Ukrainians are failing in an attempt to retake the city, although it's been retaken 3 days ago. We've also seen that as a result of this, European leaders are once again seeing that war is generally on the horizon, with Friedrich Merz saying that funding for Ukraine is going to be secured from the Germans for the next 2 years, while at the same time Poland is finally restarting anti-personnel mine production inside their country, which ceased right after the end of the Cold War in 1991. We have a humongous amount of news to cover today, folks, and of course, we're going to be covering each and every single bit of news that we can, from the largest stories first on into the smaller ones through the night. As you all know by tradition, this channel covers every story, large and small, and so we're going to be moving on without any further delay into our largest stories of the day. And we're going to be moving ourselves on down into the port of Novorossyisk to start off our beautiful, wonderful day here within the area of the Rossiysk Federation. The port of Novorossyisk is a port that has been living a tragedy, at least recently, after Ukrainian drone attacks have destroyed most everything that's valuable within the port. They have destroyed the coastal defense batteries here on the southern end of the port at the mouth of the bay. We also understand that they hit the oil loading platforms over here to the east and have largely knocked those out and rendered them largely inoperable from this point on. They've also hit the fuel loading facility for ships to be able to refuel, and we also understand that other port facilities around the area have been hit as well. well in prior times, including one of these floating dry docks within the area of the eastern side of Novorossyisk. One area, however, at least until yesterday, that had avoided most if not any damage that had happened in the port was the Vostochny Rayon. The Vostochny Rayon is a naval wharf for the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet, and it is actually a secondary base to their home basing within Sevastopol. But due to Ukrainian attacks making Sevastopol largely unfriendly or generally inhospitable to the Russian Navy, and also due to the fact that the Russians lost about half of the Black Sea Fleet in the first 2 years of the war, the Russian Federation took what was left of the Black Sea Fleet from Sevastopol, and they moved it right over here into the Vostochny Rayon. This Vostochny is a little bit of an important one, or more so the Rayon would be the correct statement for that, but this Rayon is a little bit of an important one. This Rayon serves as the actual headquarters and operational base for what is left of the Black Sea Fleet, including all of its diesel-electric submarines and surface vessels that can be involved in combatant operations against the state of Ukraine, which primarily means they conducted cruise missile attacks against the Ukrainians at sea. Recently, we've seen that this portion of the Navy is starting to become less and less used, the surviving part at least, as it's starting to become a little bit more clear, to the Russians at least, that going out to sea is incredibly dangerous really at all. Whenever a ship is out there in the open sea, whether it's civilian or military affiliated with the Russian Federation, it can come under Ukrainian drone attack at any point, and a ship standing on its own is practically defenseless against a swarm of Ukrainian Sea Baby drones. For this reason, they have started to conduct operations to where the Black Sea Fleet would sail out of the Vostochny Rayon, usually out of the Bay of Novorossyisk, and then somewhere around the region of the Kerch Strait here south, and then they would fire off their missiles from there, and then quickly, at full speed, retreat right back to Novorossyisk, right back into the Vostochny Rayon, into what was believed to be relative safety. Over the course of yesterday, that was found out to not be a relative course of safety, to go and hide in the Vostochny Rayon. Over the course of yesterday, a submarine was literally obliterated, from what we can tell, by a Sea Baby submersible drone, which sailed directly into the Vostochny Rayon, completely undetected, and then exploded right onto the machinery and propeller spaces of a Kilo-class submarine that was moored at the port. Satellite photography from today is actually showing us that this submarine is actually lying a good bit lower, at least at the back of the waterline. And this is something that we pointed out yesterday, because I want to show you all this really quickly. This picture here is one that we talked about and analyzed a great deal yesterday, and I stated that there was a clear list to starboard on the submarine that shows that it must have taken on water or some sort of damage to its primary hull and secondary hull, or basically the two pressure vessels of the sub. This is something that we weren't really able to tell for sure from this picture, because the end of the left side of the frame, which everything back towards the left side out of frame is where the damage would have actually occurred, was behind the rescue buoy, which generally doesn't show us a lot of where the supposed damage was caused by the Ukrainian drone. This satellite picture, though, is telling us something very important. Notice the rescue buoy is right there when this picture was taken. This was before the attack, by the way. This picture at the top is also showing y'all in red a translucent image of everything that existed below the waterline on the submarine. But once again, the submarine was fully submerged at port, just like its sister sub here at the bottom of the picture, and you can see that the rescue buoy is at the same height above the waterline on both of these submarines before the attack. After the attack, if you look at the bottom picture, you'll actually notice that the submarine has a clear list to starboard, and is apparently taking on water towards the starboard side of the vessel, near to the propeller and rudder machinery. We can see that once again, this Kilo-class submarine is not posing that issue, but this one, to the northern side of the Vostochny Rayon, as far as the satellite photography goes, is suffering that very issue, meaning that it has taken on water, or meaning that its ballast tanks have been ruptured due to the explosion, which is once again suggesting that extremely heavy damage has been conducted to the starboard side of the sub, whether or not the drone directly hit the sub or hit the breakwater right behind it. It was close enough that it was able to completely destroy the stern of the submarine, and for that reason, that is why it's laying low in the water with a list to stern. This also is something that has panicked the Russians to high hell. This submarine costs $500 million. Which a lot of y'all are going to say, how the hell does a submarine like that cost $500 million? That thing looks like crap. And I would agree with you all. Also, by the way, I just saw someone say, can you zoom in a bit? And yes, because I just realized some of y'all are probably looking at this on a smaller screen. So I actually show them in the larger zoomed in version, so that way we can look at them here, the before and after picture. Once again, I'll point out the differences. Here you can see, highlighted in yellow, that white circle right there that you can see in the picture is actually that rescue buoy right there. That's at the left frame of this picture. That was taken by the Russians where they claim, see, the sub is fine, because we took a picture of the whole sub except for the part that was blown up. So, you can visibly see that the sub does have some sort of a list towards the stern of the sub, and when we look at the satellite photography today, well, actually this was before the attack, you can see that the sub was sitting level on the waterline, fully unsubmerged. Then today, you can see that the sub has developed a list, and the rescue buoy is just maybe a foot above the waterline, unlike its sister sub to the south, which still has its rescue buoy several feet above the waterline, fully unsubmerged. This is showing us that this submarine has taken clear damage. So just to make sure to show that to y'all in a very zoomed in form so that way we can get this the best we possibly can, this is the before picture here showing where the rescue buoy was, and this is the after picture showing that the rescue buoy is now almost on the waterline at the stern of the sub and that this vessel does have a list. This vessel is not level, and generally that's not a good thing, especially when a sub is supposed to be moored unsubmerged at a pier. This has freaked the Russians out, getting back to what we were saying a second ago, because these subs cost about $500 million. And what's even more shocking about that is that when you put that into perspective of how much other vessels cost, it's not cheap. The Moskva, which was the flagship of the Russians' Black Sea Fleet until it was destroyed in the summer of 2022 by Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missile attack, costed $550 million. It was only $50 million more than a Kilo-class submarine, and it was the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. This was the most powerful vessel in terms of its radar systems, its fire control systems, and also the weaponry on board. And it only cost $50 million more than that Kilo-class submarine that has now clearly been damaged beyond what may be possible for Russian repairs currently inside of the Vostochny Rayon. The Russians are now seeing that it's going to be a money sink if they allow the Russian Black Sea Fleet to be further destroyed to where it's practically non-existent at this point. And so the Russians have done something that we've never seen before in modern history. They are blockading their own navy.
Insane, honestly. Absolutely nuts. They've sunk ships literally blocking the entrance to the naval port pier. It's crazy, honestly. Let's see it, by the way.
Also, by the way, just to show you all this beforehand, this is the entrance to the Vostochny. This is how every ship gets in here, and then it's moved around by tugs and whatnot, but this is the only way in and out of the Vostochny Rayon. So, the Russians have taken a whole bunch of barges, or caissons as they're sometimes called, and they have literally sunk them at the entrance. They've literally blockaded the entire Russian Navy. There they are, right there, blocking the entrance.
That's what you call a stop loss right there, I would say. That's pretty bad. For them to block in all of the remaining ships in that Black Sea port right there and pretty much lock them in to where they can't leave, that means they were definitely expecting Ukraine to launch more of those submarine attacks using those new sea babies. And they figured, we better just block the ships in or otherwise we're going to lose them all because Ukraine's going to hit again. So that is desperate to the extreme right there. Also, by the way, folks, that proves that Russia has no way to detect those new drones coming into their port. We were correct yesterday when we said that. They cannot detect them coming in. That's why they're taking a measure this drastic, is because they have no defenses to it. So that's crazy. The country without a navy, which is Ukraine, they are defeating a country with a supposed navy without even having a navy. This is never before seen in history.
You know, folks, this is now not even the Black Sea Fleet. This is the Great Fleet of the Puddle. The whole Navy is now stuck within a puddle-sized area, maybe the size of a small lake within the United States, or what some people might even call a lagoon, and is no longer able to get out of the lagoon to go anywhere. So they're now stuck within this little spot, quite literally fish in a barrel. Like, I'm sure many of y'all clicked on the title to this video and said there's no way in hell that that title is true, that Russia blockaded its own navy. And you would be sorely mistaken. It is completely true. This satellite picture from today confirms they blockaded their own navy overnight after the sub got obliterated from the Ukrainian submersible drone attack. I gotta be honest with y'all, this is something I've just never seen. I've never seen this happen before, and on top of that, there's also a whole bunch of other things that the Russians could have done rather than blocking off their ships and practically having them like rubber ducks in a tub. Russian vessels, like Chekhov would have said it in Star Trek, are equipped with aquaphones and sonar buoys. They could have just used those to conduct anti-submarine patrols out in the bay. And apparently they're not. Either they don't have the money to get those, or they just don't have the money to have these ships underway at sea, taking on the exorbitant cost of fuel consumption and maintenance involved to keep those ships afloat and at sea. So apparently they're not going to be conducting any anti-submarine warfare patrols near to the mouth of the bay. They'd rather decide at this point that it'd just be easier to literally block off the entirety of the Navy instead of to allow them to go out to sea and do what they're supposed to do. Like, it's crazy.
And also, this seems like such a panicked move by the Russians, by the way. So I see some people saying in the chat, they say this seems like basically a last-ditch effort to protect their ships. I think it is, because they could have put up, for example, netting, like submarine nets. They could have put those there to block the area as well, but they didn't do that. It could be maybe they're out of money and they can't get them, or number two, maybe it would have taken too long to set those up, and the quicker solution was to sink barges and literally just block the entire way. So it seems extremely desperate. It seems panicky, and understandably so. They just lost a $500 million submarine because they got caught lacking by a submarine drone that Ukraine launched. So I don't know what they're going to do about this, honestly, because now they have to go through the process of physically removing these barges if they want to get the ships out to sea again. So, I mean, essentially, here's another problem. Now that they've blocked in their ships, if Ukraine launches an aerial attack and Russia gets overwhelmed, these ships are fish in a barrel at this point. These things are going to be cooked by these aerial drones that can't even leave the area if they wanted to because they're blocked. So I think the Russians have created a bad situation, a really bad one.
Man, you can imagine if they come under an air attack and the air defenses are overwhelmed and they start hitting this fleet. They're like, the sub commanders are going to go, dive, and starts diving right in the middle of the part. Man, and then the ship commanders, evasive maneuvers, they're just going to like full speed it right into a wall, trying to like just make some speed so that way they can try and avoid a drone. It's going to be insanity if this place gets legitimately attacked. I'll be honest with y'all. The truth of the matter is that nothing cartoonish is going to happen. What's really going to happen is that if another drone attack occurs and it appears that the drones are making it into Vostochny, the crews of these ships are probably just going to abandon ship and run down the pier before the ships even get hit. Because why in the world stay on a ship that's about to get hit and possibly even have a magazine detonation if the Ukrainian drone is lucky enough, when they could literally just run off onto the pier and away to safety? So I have a feeling that that's probably what's going to be happening instead of anything outlandish. But still, it's going to be something interesting to note that the Russian Navy in the Black Sea is literally blockaded by its own self and cannot escape its own port at this point. That's something that you just can't make up. Like, this is how good the war is going for Russia, folks. They have to blockade their own navy to try and hope that they survive the rest of the war intact. And also, that's just something else to show. They have no abilities as a navy. Any competent navy would say, we're going to conduct anti-submarine patrols, set up anti-submarine nets. We're going to drop off aquaphones or set up some aquaphones within the water to be able to listen to the sounds of possible submersibles coming in. They're doing none of that, either because it costs too much or they're not capable of doing that. So that rather they just blockade themselves in. Really crazy, honestly.
Yeah, and also on top of that, the Russian Navy was typically a point of pride for Vladimir Putin. That was always a big thing that he was always touting, was their submarine fleet, also the entire fleet of vessels. He was always touting the might behind the Russian Navy. The Russian Navy has been embarrassed so many times, especially over just the last year alone. First of all, they had to flee Crimea and flee to Novorossyisk and flee down the way because they had to get the hell away from the Ukrainian drones. That was a huge embarrassment. Now they're getting slammed by these submarine boats, basically, and losing $500 million submarines. They also had another Kilo-class submarine have a diesel leak and basically fumigate the entire submarine, and it had to limp back home with a tugboat, basically guiding it back in. So, I mean, the Russian Navy that was once the pride of the Russian Empire at this point, I mean, there's no pride left anymore. The thing's a joke, and they're running for their life, running like a dog with his tail tucked behind his back. So, I mean, this is embarrassing. You got to imagine. That's why Putin's so angry today. He's out and he's livid. He's threatening NATO. He's going off. He's saying he's ready for a war. It's getting to him. It's really embarrassing.
And also another thing, folks, I got to say is that this is probably going to be the funniest thing to round this all out. if this remains a permanent fixture at the Vostochny, I can promise you all the Ukrainians are going to make a sea baby that can jump like a dolphin, and they'll probably just try and jump right over that caisson, or jump high enough that they can just slide across it onto the other side, and then they'll conduct an attack that way. I'm sure that that's what's going to be coming next, because the Ukrainians have been creating wonky weapons, especially in drone warfare, to really deal with any situation and basically be a toolkit of the battlefield that's easily adaptable and cheap to produce in mass. So I'm promising y'all that the next thing they're going to do is either create a sea baby that can jump right over a caisson, or they're probably just going to be flying drones in and slamming the Russian Navy, since they literally can't escape the place now. It's going to be one or the other. They might do both simultaneously. That might also be the case as well. But something like that's going to happen, I'm sure. And also on top of that, folks, another thing is that it wouldn't take a lot to actually make a sea baby jump over a caisson, or at least get a little bit of air to be able to kind of hop on top of it and then slide across. There are some boats that actually have that ability out there currently that are privately owned and generally for recreational purposes, but that does not mean that you cannot use that same technology, or at least the same theory, and apply that to a drone bomb and then have it literally jump right over a caisson or a barge. That's not out of the question. But anyways, with that in mind, folks, a lot of people are talking about the bombshell news that Russia did blockade its own navy. And Matthew, what are people thinking about the fact of this major national embarrassment for the Russians and the fact that it's seen on satellite? And what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So the Russians doing this very drastic maneuver that we've never seen before ever, like a military blockading its own port because they can't protect their ships from submarine drones. That has never happened before. And this is all in a direct response to Ukraine striking and destroying that $500 million submarine that Putin claims is not destroyed, even though we see it clearly listing in the satellite images. They're once again saying that the submarine is perfectly fine and it's all made up, that the fact there was a huge explosion right next to it apparently damaged it. So what are your thoughts about the whole situation? 50% said the Black Sea Fleet is dead, while 28% said it's just a temporary defense and it's no big deal, and about 16% said Russia really had to do it, they had no choice. And I'll be honest with you, they really did not have to do this. Like I said before, they could have put up submarine nets. That would have tended to the problem. And they could have also taken other measures to, like the enforcer mentioned, to actually detect the submarine boats coming into port. But Russia did not do that. They didn't do the sensible thing. They did the panic thing, which was to start blowing up and sinking vessels and block their entire fleet into the port. So, I mean, honestly, it's laughable. It's really honestly laughable. They've literally blocked in their whole fleet. So, I'm not sure what's going to happen from here. Ukraine might be shocked by this, and I'm not sure if Ukraine's ready to go with a follow-up strike, but an aerial strike on this sub-pen right here and also the ship area, this might be the most devastating attack we've ever seen before if Ukraine carries it out using their long-range missiles. So I'll be waiting to see if that happens. But Enforcer, what say you?
And honestly, the Black Sea Fleet is dead at this point. They're a sitting duck waiting to die right now. Either the Russian caissons are going to be overcome by other naval drones that might be able to find a way to get around them, which is going to be incredibly difficult and will require probably a new drone or a new drone design. Or they're going to conduct an air attack on this Vostochny and they're going to knock it out that way, or at least destroy or heavily damage most of the ships within the port that way as well. One or the other. These vessels are practically dead. I'm not going to lie, Matthew, probably in about 2 or 3 months, if this still stands, the Russians are going to watch a sea baby come in, man, on the surface, and they're going to be firing at it, and someone's going to go, oh, don't worry, the Navy isn't at risk. We have a giant wall of barges here. And then they're going to see it go, boop, and hop right over it. Oh, like it's like, like, oh God,
Man.
it's over.
I tell you what, if we get bouncing sea babies next, that'll be another big shock to me. But I'll be honest, like I'm not saying this is going to happen because obviously we can't predict this. There's no telling what Ukraine's going to do next. But if Ukraine did not follow up with an aerial strike on this target right here, where they literally just blocked their ships in, I would be very, very surprised, because you couldn't get a more target-rich environment that's now literally trapped in place that can't move. You literally couldn't. I'm still honestly shocked the Russians did this. It's so bad. I would not be shocked either to see the Russians immediately and very quickly try to move these out of the way and install submarine nets next to try to deal with this. They might realize, too late, that they've done something stupid and try to reverse it. But if Ukraine acts fast, I mean, this could be really, really bad for the Russians.
It could be going quite poorly. This is, in a sense, folks, at least for the Russians in the Black Sea, this is Battleship Row at Pearl Harbor, and they literally stopped any of them from leaving. So this is Pearl Harbor, but nobody has a chance to even attempt an escape out of Pearl Harbor, basically, if the Ukrainians try and attack this thing. So I'd say they ought to attack it while the time's ripe. I'll be honest with y'all, I think they ought to try and pull out the fine China here to be able to hit this. Think of this, folks. If they conducted a mass drone attack, the Ukrainians did with, say, 80 drones going in this direction, and then after the drones started to get within the air defense perimeter of Novorossyisk, they fired off a series of Neptune or Flamingo missiles. It's going to be over for these people within this port. It's not going to last that much longer after that, because one Flamingo hitting down in one of these piers is going to obliterate one ship nearly completely, and is going to heavily damage the second one of the pier as well. You probably only need maybe 2 or 3 well-placed Flamingos to render the remainder of the Black Sea Fleet inoperable, especially if you're overwhelming their air defenses with drone-based units that are already in the airspace during the time of that attack. So, I don't know, maybe the Ukrainians are going to take advantage of the situation. We'll have to wait and see, but right now is a prime time opportunity. But moving on out of that, now to the port of Novorossyisk, it's time for us to move on into some other big news that has to do with the sea. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that another unknown ship was apparently hit tonight. Apparently that doesn't exist anymore. Bummer. But apparently another unknown ship was hit within the area. We don't know what it was, but we are trying to figure out information on that at the moment. There was also another unknown ship hit in Rostov-on-Don, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. Moving on out of the Rossiysk Federacy, though, we do have to move on into another majorly important piece of news tonight, which moves us on into the Eastern Caribbean and the hunt for Captain Crack Sparrow and his band of 40 thieves. It's time for us to get on.
Also, by the way, Enforcer, before we jump into our determined news real quick, take a look. There is still an FA-18 circling near Caracas. I'll be honest, we can't, also by the way, folks, we're not going to start making predictions about, oh, an attack's happening right now. We're not doing that again. We did it before, and it's impossible to predict. But we are seeing right now, though, an FA-18 is currently doing, it looks like a racetrack right outside of Caracas, about 60 miles from the coast. That might be one of the closest flights that we've seen of an F-18 near the capital city of Venezuela. So we have seen that tonight. We've also seen some other aircraft taking off from U.S. bases around the United States, but nothing is determinative right now. All we know is there's a very close flight, which is probably making Maduro panic, I would imagine, literally right off the coast, and one of the closest ones we've seen.
Interestingly enough, this is only, like, at its closest. It's about 3 miles away from the beginning of territorial waters and airspace of the nation of Venezuela, at least on their mainland. So it is right there, actually. It's very close to pretty much being within their territorial waters and borders. And from what we know, also to add this as well, FA-18 Super Hornets nor any U.S. military aircraft ever operate solo unless if it's a specialized aircraft designed to do such a thing. For example, a lot of people will think of reconnaissance aircraft like the U-2 and the SR-71, which did operate solo, a standalone aircraft, but combat aircraft very rarely ever fly as a singular aircraft. There usually is at least a wingman alongside that aircraft with its transponder off. So that would give us an idea that there is actually a formation of FA-18s, at least 2 or larger, that's currently flying around this area off the coast of Venezuela and is apparently trying to incite the Venezuelans, possibly. There also is a lot of other flights going on as well that are on transponder, including another Super Hornet that has been all over the place tonight. We also understand that there are 2 Growlers, Grizzly 1 and Grizzly 2, which are also flying around the area currently, once again in a formation as well. So it looks at the moment that, at least for now, there is a decent amount of aircraft within the area of Venezuela while we're on air talking here on this stream. As far as whether or not there's going to be any bombings going on tonight in Venezuela, I can't tell y'all for sure. You just can't tell. It's a completely unpredictable sort of an environment these days with that sort of information and prediction. So while I can tell you that it's quite close to getting to a war, I can't say that it's going to happen tonight or tomorrow or the next week even. We're just kind of having to play it by ear. But we did get to hear some major news out of the area today. Speaking of the hunt for Captain Crack Sparrow, we were able to see that the Growlers were operating around the coast earlier in the day. The very same ones, mind you all, which were still there about several hours ago. This was about 3 hours ago at this point. We've also seen that apparently the Department of Defense has hit another narco boat. I gotta say this, folks, one thing that's becoming quite interesting to me is how they are starting to blur out the center of these supposed narco vessels, which is where the contraband would have been. And because of the blurring that's selectively happening within the midships area of this boat, we can't see what's in it, actually, whether it's contraband or completely legal cargo. We have no clue. But they did hit the boat with a Hellfire. You can see that here in this clip.
Also, by the way, that boat seemed to be going much slower than the other boats that we've seen previously. Also, go back for a second. Let's see what kind of engine loadout this thing had on it. So it's really hard to tell from this angle right here. It's so blurry and also darkened near the rear. But how many outboards do you see?
It looks like three.
3 outboards. Do they appear to be large ones? Because I can barely make anything out.
They look like they'd be pretty decently sized, I would say, I would think, but once again, it's hard to see.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, folks. It's hard to tell. I will admit though, like you're saying though, the blurring is a little bit suspicious because they haven't done that until recently, until there's been criticism, and now all of a sudden they're blurring out the middle of the boat, which seems a little bit suspect. But I'm not sure if that looks like a fishing boat just from common sense. Like once again, large outboards. It seems to be a boat that doesn't appear to have any fishing equipment, at least hanging off the side of it or anything. So it's just hard to tell. We don't have much information.
And also, Peaceful War said, would you have been able to tell if there wasn't any blur? Back in the past, we could on some of them. They got such up-close film of the boats, you could clearly see packs of almost like brick-shaped items within the center of the boat, individually wrapped and stacked in a large central area of the boat, which gave us a clear idea that these vessels were carrying contraband at the time of the strikes, which kind of legitimizes it a little bit, but, you know, once again, generally confirming, at least in evidence, that there was some form of contraband on board the vessel. Here, there is really none that we can see because the center of the ship is blurred. And before anyone says, oh, well, they're blurring out the people, they're not blurring out the people. When the Hellfire hits, you can't see anything at all, so this isn't for censoring purposes. And also, the people aren't in the middle of the boat. The people are at the front of the boat. You can see one of them right there, and everyone else is at the back of the boat, out of the blurred field of vision. So nobody within the boat is in the middle of the boat. They're all at the back of the boat, either operating the outboard motors or steering the boat, or they're at the front of the boat navigating, or at least just sitting there getting their trip on to wherever they're going. The middle of the boat, where all the cargo would be carried conventionally, which is what we've seen whenever it's not been blurred, it's being blurred out. So I'd say the transparency is starting to become a lot more amiss these days, at least within the Department of Defense's unclassified publishings.
Yeah, and without seeing the cargo, it could be anything. I mean, I guess it could be carp in the middle of the boat, or it could be Coke. It sounds like a new TV show game that should come up with carp or Coke. We can't really tell which one it is at this point, honestly, because they're blurring it out. I really have no idea why they would blur that out. Like, it's not an OPSEC thing. We're not protecting the OPSEC of the alleged drug runners. It's like, why would we blur out something on their boat? I can understand blurring out something on ours if it was in the photo, but it's not.
We have to blur it out, Matthew, for the protection and safety of the cocaine. We can't let everyone know what cocaine it was, because then someone's going to say, hey, that's Daniel Cocaine, and then his identity is going to be blocked. So, anyways, we can see the Hellfire slamming down into this thing here in a second, which turns it into a roaring Hellfire. And then after that, the entire boat's obscured, and once again, they've got the blurred dot over the area of the boat that would have the contraband in it if it had contraband in it. So, I gotta say, folks, the current administration really isn't beating the allegations that it might be blowing up fishermen because, you know, at the beginning, it was somewhat questionable whether or not these vessels were involved in cartel operations or whether or not we had gone through the proper steps to confirm that they were involved in narco-terrorist operations to conduct a strike against them at all. Now the administration, or generally the Department of Defense, is taking it a step even further, and now they're blurring out the middle of the boat, which is really the only indicator that we have publicly to confirm or deny if there was any contraband on board the vessel, and they're not even allowing us to see what was on the vessel when they blew it up. So instead of becoming more transparent and proving that these vessels should be hit, they become less transparent and are once again just largely forcing the idea that these boats are all being legally hit and are all a part of a narco-terrorist group. And I gotta say, folks, I'm one to say that I believe heavily in being aggressive against our adversaries, but at the same time, you do have a duty to the public, which is the nation itself, to disclose to them and show to them that what is being done is above board. If we can't even now see the middle of the boat to confirm if there was drugs on board or not in the public, it's starting to make it even more difficult to have a discourse about whether or not these strikes are legal, at least for the entirety of the public. And that also is starting to lead me to believe, folks, that these strikes may actually be some form of an illegal strike, or maybe very questionable as far as the rules of war are concerned. Because why in the world, if they were in the right, why in the world would they have to blur out the middle of the boat and completely remove any detail as to what they're even carrying when they're blowing up these boats now? And that seems to be very suspect to me, just looking at that and deducing common sense out of the whole thing. But moving on from that, we do also know that the United States of America is operating its air forces and armed forces out of Santo Domingo's airports as well, with footage and pictures being published by the United States Air Force of their aerial tankers operating out of Santo Domingo. I do have to say the KC-135s are pretty cool to see, along with the C-17s, which are dropping off apparently some special equipment. We can also see a C-130 there in the background taking off and heading elsewhere. We can also see other KC-135s here at the airport, and also another C-17 with it's actually got an empty cargo bay in there, and we do not know what they're going to be loading or unloading, or what they just unloaded after that picture was taken. Moving on from that, though, we also have been able to see some additional information from over at Ponce in Puerto Rico, as the Iwo Jima, and along with its auxiliary, the USNS Robert E. Perry, otherwise known as Take 5. Ha! Get it? It's a support ship. You're taking a break from the battle. It's called Take 5. Ah! But anyways, they were both at Ponce today and were moored, apparently awaiting further orders or further assignments. We can see a Seahawk on the deck of the Iwo Jima that is in the stowed configuration, with its rotor blades back and its tail actually spun over. And we can also see, once again, a little bit more detail of the USS Iwo Jima. Really interesting sort of an LHD, and once again, it appears that it and its amphibious strike group, or amphibious ready group, is currently inside of Ponce at the moment, or at least around the area. We've also seen further details coming out of Venezuela that's really going to get this thing into a full-blown war, probably here really soon. We did get to hear that the Venezuelan government is now going to be attempting to break the U.S. blockade. This is going to end quite poorly. Venezuela has now ordered its navy to escort ships carrying petroleum products from port following the blockade announcement. That is going to be heavily increasing the risk of an armed confrontation. The United States has officially declared a blockade effective yesterday, and right now the United States Navy's vessels within the area have orders to stop, seize, and confiscate vessels that are attempting to exit Venezuela or enter Venezuelan waters. This means that if the Venezuelan Navy is attempting to escort these ships out of their waters, that then means that the U.S. Navy is going to be getting into a direct confrontation with the Venezuelans in an attempt to seize that vessel. If that happens, there is a very high chance that the Venezuelan Navy may actually fire upon the United States to try and defend the ship, or we may fire upon the Venezuelans to try and take the ship that they're escorting. Either way, this is going to be greatly increasing the chances of an actual armed confrontation happening within the area. And I've got to be honest with you all, I don't really know who's going to fire first, the Venezuelans at us or us at them. But it's guaranteed at this point, someone's going to get shot at down here. It's just one of us is going to be on the receiving end or the other. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so certainly a really, really bad idea. Venezuela's already scared, so they're already lashing out. They're deploying their F-16s anytime an F-18 shows up near their border. So now they're going to take the really, really bad step of sending out Navy ships. So believe it or not, Venezuela has a Navy. They're going to send them out to confront the U.S. Navy ships, which is way, way overpowered compared to Venezuelan ships by a long shot. And they're going to try to defend these oil tankers that are blockaded by the United States government. So what happens? What happens when the Venezuelans try to protect those ships? 58% said the U.S. Navy will fire on the Venezuelan Navy, while 19% said it seems like a 50-50 chance of an altercation, and 15% said nothing will happen and the USA will back off and they're simply bluffing. So me personally, I don't think the U.S. Navy is going to hesitate. If a sanctioned oil vessel, and that's a very important distinction right there, a sanctioned oil vessel, they're not going to be firing at just any oil tanker or any type of Navy vessel. It's only going to be the ones that are sanctioned. I believe the U.S. will fire upon the Venezuelan Navy that tries to interdict the U.S. Navy vessels from stopping and boarding those oil tankers. And they would have every reason to do so, because if they are sanctioned, the U.S. has already said they are not going to let those ships go to or fro Venezuela, and they will be boarding and taking them. And also, just to quote a reference here, by the way, let me get this on Twitter. We do have a post here from Max25, and this was the U.S. president, by the way. He said, it's a blockade. We're not going to let anybody go through that shouldn't be going through. They took all of our oil, referring to Venezuela. They illegally took it, and we want it back. So to me, it sounds like not only is it a blockade, but also it's basically an operation to start taking the oil that Venezuela is transporting to and from their country and basically absorbing it into the United States. So it sounds to me like the U.S. is not bluffing on this. I think they actually will follow through with it, and with the 59%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd say there's a really high chance that either Venezuela is going to fire at us, or we're going to fire at them when we get in a confrontation with them to try and seize these vessels. It is incredibly clear that this is not going to be going all too well, to be entirely honest. This will lead to a direct confrontation. So if a lot of people were trying to avoid a conflict, it's going to be unavoidable once this happens. The Venezuelans actually do have a little bit of firepower that they can leverage to protect these ships. Crazily enough, folks, y'all wouldn't believe it, but they actually do have a navy. Not an incredibly sizable one, but it still is sizable enough that they can actually put up a little bit of an armed fight against the United States, at least at sea. Let me show y'all some of the more impressive vessels that they have on their register currently. First off, they have two Type 09 diesel-electric submarines from Germany. These are basically coastal patrol subs, but what they really are is basically an upgraded U-boat from the Second World War. It takes all of the doctrine and design elements of a U-boat, especially I believe it was the Type 29, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and pretty much put it into a modern usable form. They have two of these. We don't know if they're operational, but more importantly, they do have this one missile frigate, the Almirante Briand. This is their only missile frigate. It does have the ability to conduct anti-ship attacks. You can see at least 4 on deck anti-ship missile launchers. You can also see that it does have a main flak gun, which would be used in air defense, and also in some very limited engagements against other vessels, and then it also has some air defense turrets as well. They then additionally have the Guaquieri class patrol boats, which are somewhat advanced, at least for what you would think the Venezuelans would have. Apparently, these have been, one of them has been put out of service since 2012, but 3 of them are still in operational service at the moment. They also have the Guacamaycuto class, which they also have a limited number of as well, but from here, they start to become much smaller vessels. I mean, we're getting on into gunboat territory, and so it's not an incredibly large navy, but they still do have some ships to put up at least a little bit of resistance. So if we're counting the offshore patrol vessels and the frigate, they have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6... They have 6 vessels that they could use to try and break the U.S. blockade. Not a great deal of them, but, you know, still it's something, and they are going to get absolutely curb stomped by the U.S. Navy, but it could lead to them having enough confidence that they could get into a firefight with us. But we actually have breaking news coming out of this moment. So, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so we have just made a revelation, folks. The FA-18, which is currently doing a racetrack around Caracas, about 50 miles or so off the coast, appears to be doing a racetrack around 2 oil tankers that are currently right off the coast of Caracas. There are 2 oil tankers which appear to be right underneath where the F-18 is circling. So, Enforcer, if you can pull up marine traffic, there are actually 2 of them. Sadly, I have not had time to check and see if they are sanctioned oil vessels. I don't know that right now. But there are 2 in that general area where that F-18 is circling around. So some people are speculating. I'm seeing 2 or 3 people in the chat speculating that maybe this is some type of interdiction that the U.S. is carrying out, but we don't know that for a fact right now. This is all speculation, but there are the 2 right there, so you can kind of show us which ones are being hovered over.
So I wouldn't be able to say, folks, with certainty which ships are on the sanction list or not. This one is actually flagged under the Maltese flag of Malta. So I do not know if this ship would fall at all under any sort of a sanctions registry. I would have a feeling that it probably is not, but I might be mistaken. We also know that the Xanthos, which is flagged out of, I believe, the Marshall Island, the Seychelles. It's some sort of an Eastern Pacific country, well, a Western Pacific country, an island country. I can tell y'all I know that flag, but I can't tell y'all the exact country that's a part of. Apparently, its abbreviation is CW. So, Matthew, can you pull that up really quickly and see what nation is flagging this vessel or what the vessel claims its nationality is by pulling up the abbreviation CW for a nationality and seeing what we get out of that?
So it appears to be Curacao, but take that with a grain of salt, though. It appears to be that CW would stand for Curacao.
Now, let me go pull up their flag. Flag of Curacao.
Also, by the way, another update, the FA-18, which is circling around these vessels right here, just turned off its transponder, and we're not sure where it went.
Oh, it's no longer found. Man, it disappeared like a mist into the wind. Look at that, it's gone. So now we see the Growlers up here, and also its FA-18 Super Hornet buddy up here in the Eastern Caribbean has also turned off its transponder as well. So now the only aircraft that have their transponders on are actually the two Growlers that are out of the area north of Curacao and also north of Isla Orchila. So that's what we understand at the moment. But it does appear that that FA-18 was apparently orbiting over these two aircraft. And Matthew, do you think you could find, and try and dig this up off air, some information on these two vessels and if they fall under any sanctions register here in the United States of America?
Yeah, I'll see if I can find something on it real quick. I'll have to do some looking in the database to see if it's listed under the International Registry for Sanctioned Vessels. I'm not super agile with that system, I'll be perfectly honest, but I'll see what I can find out.
Let's see here. Let's see. Let me see if I can find anything here. So the Sea-Leo, is currently not listed, from what I can see, as a sanctioned crude oil tanker. So it is not on an existent sanctions list. Let's take a look at the Xanthos. Let's see. Xanthos, EOS. Oh, okay. So actually, according to the Danish Maritime Authority, it actually does appear that the Xanthos EOS is on a EU sanctioned designated vessels list. So
Allegedly, at least. Oh, by the way, folks, we're doing on the spot investigating, so we could make errors with this. So take it all with a grain of salt. We're currently trying to determine if they're on sanctions list, but we could be mistaken. So just take that as you will.
Also, by the way, I did go to the Danish Maritime Authority's website. This is a government website of the Danish Maritime Authority out of the Kingdom of Denmark. And this is the EU-sanctioned designated vessels designation list. It was last updated, from what we can tell, on the 23rd of October of 2025. And if we look down this list, at least for the Xanthos EOS, because we're not seeing this one on any sanctions list, even an alleged claim of it being on a sanctions list anywhere. But according to the Danish Maritime Authority, this is the, let's see, designated vessels as listed in Annex, let's see, that would be, oh damn, that'd be like 62, I believe, of Council Regulation EU 833 /2014. Please note that the vessels can change names, so it's important to check the IMO number of the vessel before your company provides services to such a vessel. So, let's take a look down the list, and we're looking for the Xanthos, so that would be under the X's. Actually, this is not in alphabetical order. So let's just take a look down the whole list, and we're going to look for one that starts with an X. And hopefully we'll be able to find one soon. We're actually doing this on air, folks, so a lot of the information we're trying our best to find. It was apparently formerly the Murmar. Let's check the number here, which should generally... Let's see here. Actually, vessel details. Let's look for vessel details here. And the IMO is 9231212. So the IMO here is 9231212. So it does appear that according to the Kingdom of Denmark, the Xanthos EOS, which is the name and IMO of the vessel here, just off of the coast of Venezuela, apparently does fall under an EU sanctions list for vessels that are apparently operating according to their allegations as a part of the Russian Shadow Fleet. So this vessel does appear to be the one that would be a point of interest, at least from what we can find quickly, by the USFA 18 Super Hornet, and it may also be showing, at least considering that it's within international waters at the moment due to its distance offshore, that there may be some possible surveillance action being conducted against this vessel by the United States, or maybe even some form of action against the vessel, possibly another attempt at a seizure of a vessel within the area. So that would be the best that we could take a pot shot at, but it does appear that according to the information from the EU sanctions list, this vessel does fall, at least allegedly according to their claims, on a sanctions list by the IMO and the name of the vessel.
Yeah, well, what is that? What is that IMO number, real quick? Can you rattle that one off so I can see if it matches up with what I'm looking at here?
The number is as follows: 9231212.
Okay, so I'm looking over here on a different site called opensanctions.org. And I'm seeing here, once again, I want to emphasize, all allegedly, we're doing this on the spot. It looks like Murmar Xanthos Eos. It's gone by apparently a couple different names, actually. It's saying that the country is Russia, at least over here, and it is showing that it is subject to some sort of sanctions. And it appeared to be flagged out of Panama at one point, then out of the Bahamas, then out of Malta. So it appears to be this vessel here has changed, at least allegedly, a bit. So let's see here. Here's something. It says Swiss sanctions transport crude oil that originate in Russia or exported from Russia. Let's see here. So yeah, there appear to be allegations this vessel is involved with something here that relates to sanctions, but it's kind of hard to tell for exactly what they're referring to.
But it does appear that the Danish are saying that it is on the European Union sanction list, which this is the sanctions list that was ratified by a European Union vote. And these votes have been done multiple times throughout the war in Ukraine to update the sanctions list and to include and exclude vessels from it that have been included in prior ones. But according to the most recent statement by the Danish Maritime Authority, this vessel actually does fall on the European Union sanction list. I wouldn't know about a global sanctions list or a United States-based sanctions list, but it apparently falls on theirs. Whether or not that would interest the United States, that's up to question. I wouldn't really know. But the number, the IMO, and the name of the vessel does match up with the one that we're currently seeing that's flagged out of Curacao that is off of the coast of Venezuela. Now, if we can get an idea on its exact position off of the coast, it actually is almost at a direct parallel with the Isla de la Ochila. Actually, I'm sorry, correction, that would not be that one. That would be the Isla de la Tortuga. So if we were to take an exact measurement off of the Venezuelan coastline to that approximate area, it is currently, ooh, this is a close one, folks. It's either right within Venezuela's territorial waters or it's right outside of it. It's right at the very hurdle in between being in territorial waters and in international waters. So we actually don't know which one it's lying under at the moment. We don't know if this GPS information is 100% accurate. And it actually appears that right now it is steaming at a southeasterly direction at 9.5 knots. So trying to make it further into territorial waters at the moment. So a little bit interesting with that. And also I do have to mention, folks, that according to Marine Tracker, this vessel is currently flagged out of Curacao, which is just up here to the north. So fairly interesting with that, and we'll be keeping an eye on that information and giving y'all more updates as we can if there's any further developments to the possible story that we're watching developing on air right now. But with that in mind, folks, it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news that we've gotten out of Venezuela, and we have been able to hear some additional statements. One, 2 F-16s were airborne today along the coastline. This isn't anything too big. They only have 4 operational F-16s within the entirety of their country, and also F-16s have been airborne quite often, at least recently. Really everywhere in between Cadia Lamar and all the way down to the city of Valencia. Meanwhile, we've also heard out of the Venezuelan government that they are now requesting an emergency UN Security Council meeting to discuss ongoing U.S. aggression against the country. I don't really think that's going to help them because the UN hasn't really helped anyone for the past 80 years, so I don't think they're going to be helped out in that either. Also due to the fact that the United States is is a permanent Security Council member with a veto power, that is not really going to help them out at all. It's like, what is the UN going to do? Nothing. They haven't done anything against Russia. They're sure as hell not going to do anything against the United States. So with that in mind, I hope that does address our news out of the hunt for Captain Crack Sparrow fairly well, at least within the direct area of the Caribbean, while some of the extremity nations within the region are calling for de-escalation. Brazil and Mexico are currently calling for de-escalation as the U.S. is still ramping up its pressure on the Venezuelans, according to Reuters. At the same time, we
also, real quick, by the way, the F-18 is back, and it appears to be still circling the same perimeter area as those oil tankers. So it's still there. It hasn't left. It simply turned off transponder for a second, I guess to cause maybe some heart issues with the Venezuelan leaders, perhaps. They probably had a little blood pressure spike, and now it's back and it's doing the same racetrack.
Man, bro, the Venezuelans went, where do you go, man? Like, they were looking at it on Flight Radar 24 too. Oh, man, I'm telling you, it's really something. But beyond that, we are going to be keeping an eye on that story, folks, the best we can. It has returned. So very interesting to know. It's actually at an altitude of 26,000 feet at the moment, and it is traveling at a speed of 383 knots, which is 441 miles per hour, which means it's actually kind of moving a little bit slowly, which is also interesting to note as well. Anyways, with that, folks, it is time for us to move on into a little bit more news. We were able to hear that a U.S. Air Force E-11, which is a battlefield communications relay aircraft, actually took off today, apparently from this little air base right here in the middle of Georgia, right near Macon, Georgia. Where the hell is it? Oh, it's down here. Robbins Air Force Base. Apparently took off from here. Wow, is this a graveyard? There's like a tail section here.
That's bad. That looks kind of Russian.
Suka, I mean, like, honestly, man, like, a lot of these kind of looks like a little bit of a graveyard out here at this air base. But yeah, I mean, this is a literal chop shop. What the hell? So apparently it took off from the chop shop, and it's flying on down into the area of the Southcom area of responsibility. So that's a little bit interesting to know. And now, moving us on up into Langley, we also were able to hear that a large amount of F-22s took off tonight out of Langley. And there was a little clip that showed it. We're not going to play the clip, but a group of F-22 Raptors took off from Langley Air Force Base in Virginia around 3 hours ago, which is now about 6 hours ago, in 3 separate waves of 2 to 4 jets each, supported by at least one KC-135 Stratotanker. We don't know where those are going, but it's believed that they may be heading towards Venezuela. We have also heard out of Washington a great deal of statements today. One, some people within the Congress are making war-rousing statements, like Representative Carlos A. Jimenez, who stated, "And if despotism raises its voice, follow the example that Caracas gave. The moment of the brave people has arrived." Okay. We also have been able to hear that there has now been a halt on outgoing flights to Venezuela. Operational concerns have prompted the cancellation of several deportation flights to Venezuela for the time being. Deportees will remain in detention until flight resumes, or may be sent to Mexico if Mexico agrees to accept them. That's News Nation citing Department of Homeland Security sources. We've also heard that apparently the War Powers Resolution within the Congress today was actually defeated. The Venezuelan War Powers Resolution, designed to block any U.S. military operations or strikes within Venezuelan territory, was narrowly defeated in a 211 to 213 vote. As a result, the president now faces a significantly easier legal path to authorize strikes or military action against Venezuela. Once again, opening
that was also surprisingly close. I was kind of surprised with how close that vote actually was. Now, they were actually, in fact, very close in the Congress to actually telling the president that he could not launch aggressions on Venezuela. So ultimately it was defeated, which does make it a lot easier for the president to launch action on Venezuela. Of course, he can't declare war. That's solely up to the Congress. He can't do that, but he can start within his purview attacks if it's deemed to be in the interest of the United States. So, like, for example, Bush did that as well back during his tenure. So that is legal. It's not preferable because preferably Congress would be the ones to basically declare that situation, and then the president could order the forces to do what they got to do. But that's not the way it works in the modern day. It's more like the president starts wars, and then Congress has to just sort of fall in line, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much that's how it kind of is these days. Before anyone starts saying that it's illegal, this has been going on since 1950. But moving on from that, we also were able to hear that apparently, according to the president, Venezuela threw our companies out. We want it back. I don't understand why that's the case. Because I thought, folks, that for the longest time here, for like 3.5 months, the whole deal was that they were importing fentanyl into America and they were killing Americans. Now apparently it's the fact that U.S. companies got expelled from a country. Um,
Yeah. I
so
heard they're already divvying up who wants what oil in Venezuela. That's the word on the street. Is the government in the United States is currently asking the oligarchs, the oil oligarchs in the United States, which one of y'all wants which piece and stuff like that. It's like, huh, interesting. I guess they're really going to war eventually, or they wouldn't be doing that kind of talk.
yeah, apparently not. So apparently, folks, this whole thing really might be for the oil, like some people have been saying. And I'm sure that eventually it'll flip around to also being we need to kick China and Russia out of here, which is also coming around the corner as well. But I gotta say, folks, I've got to say, it's a little bit hard to really figure out what we're doing and what the whole point of this is when now we're changing the messaging at the 11th hour as to why we're doing this, because they went full in on it's to go beat the cartels up. Now it's we need to go back and get oil. On top of that, I also got to say that it's a little bit weird that we're saying that, considering that America is practically pulling out of every area of the world and acting like nothing's their problem. But for some reason, when U.S. companies are expelled out of Venezuela, then it's their problem, which doesn't make any sense. You would think that if we're just going to become isolationists, there wouldn't be any problems anywhere. But apparently, we do have problems. Whenever those big oil companies have a problem, the U.S. government goes, "Sir, yes, sir," and then we go right down there and we fix it. But moving on from that, we also have been able to hear that apparently the United States has now passed, well, the U.S. Senate passed a $901 billion defense bill. That's the NDAA, which means that this is now going to go to the president for his stamp of approval. If he vetoes it, it will then go back to the House and the Senate, and they will have to get a two-thirds majority to pass it, whether the president likes it or not. And considering how the votes went currently, it's probably going to be pretty easy if the president vetoes this National Defense Authorization Act for them to just veto his veto and then push it through anyways. So it's probably going to go through no matter what. So the president can either sign it and pretend like he's on board with it, or he can veto it, and then the Congress will go and get a large enough majority to pass it anyways. So probably not going to be a good thing, a good move. But anyways, we'll see how that goes. Still, the NDAA had a lot of interesting details within it, a great deal of them. I'm not going to go into all of them. I was trying to read as much of it as I could today. It is 3,000 pages, and I can't even pretend to say that I made it through more than a couple of dozen of those pages over the course of the day, but it did have some very interesting provisions within it, and specific details of what the military is going to be doing over the next several years, or really not really over the next several years, just over the next year. But still, with that, I hope we were able to address all the news out of Washington well. And with that, folks, it's time for us to start moving on out of the hunt for Captain Cracksborough and his band of 40 thieves, and it's time for us to start moving on into East Asia to cover all the news that's happened in East Asia. But before we get on all into that, we do have to take a little bit of a moment to say, holy smokes, what a lot of people have been here tonight. A whole load of people. A load of them. 14.5 thousand people have been here tonight, and 67,000 people have watched the stream so far. I hope you all been enjoying it, and we thank you all greatly for watching so far. We still have a lot of crazy news to go. Of course, we got Comedy Hour coming around with the Thailand-Cambodia war, so make sure to stick around for that. The casino war is honestly a gamble and a jackpot, at least, in comedy. But before we get on into all of that, I do want to make sure that we take a little bit of a moment to be able to address a couple of questions, because there are a lot of people out there who have all kinds of questions, and we want to at least address a few of them to give everyone a bit of a halftime show before we move on into the rest of all that news. So, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so jumping into our first three super chats, our first one goes to none other than Brian Maddox, and Brian puts in a $50 support, and thank you very much, Brian, for supporting the channel in a very big way and helping to keep us on the air, because like we always say, we are crowdfunded by the viewers, and it's those viewer super chats that make the stream possible, and we do appreciate that. And he said, how do Putin's advisors talk to him and bring him news, and are they totally sheepish? Oh, and absolutely. He said, do they spend hours thinking, okay, now what? Do we have any other options, no matter how stupid? And Slav Ukraine, LSA. Brian, you are 100% onto it. All of Putin's advisors are sheepish, and they're sheepish for good reason. If Putin does not get what he wants to hear, Putin goes berserk. He did it in public one time with Sergei Naryshkin, who's the spy chief for Russia. He did it at a meeting, and everybody was there. All the cameras were on him, and Putin publicly humiliated Sergei in front of literally all the top officials because Sergei did not 100% support every single thing that Putin was saying. So they know you tell Putin what he wants to hear at all cost, or else Putin might come after you. That's what they know. So Putin doesn't get any real advice. He basically gets an echo chamber. But Enforcer, what say you?
He doesn't get any advice at all. I'm about to show you all that here in a little bit. We're actually getting around to that in the news tonight in Moscow because they are literally lying to him outright. I don't know if he ever does his own research or if he just listens to his government officials on how things are going. Because if he's only listening to his government officials on how things are going, he actually believes today that the Russian army is still in strong control of the city of Kupyansk and is winning the battle within that area, even against the Ukrainian counterattack, which took the entire city 3 days ago. So if he's not doing any of his own research or information gathering and he's listening to his aides are actually telling him, or at least his top advisors are telling him, that everything's going peachy and nothing's ever been better, which is going to be pretty fatal for the Russian government because they literally lost Kupyansk. There's nothing left there. The Ukrainians are in complete control of the city again. So it's not really like, there's even a point of contention or an argument to be had there about, oh, well, maybe they hold it. No, they're literally the only Russians that are left there. And let me go show you all this because this is the situation as it is today. The only Russians that are left in Kupyansk are in these little pockets right down here. These are all that's left. And they're being slammed by the Ukrainians every day, and there's probably not going to be a lot of them left alive by the time that they finally implode, as far as the pockets go. But Gerasimov stated today to Putin in public, we're still in complete control of Kupyansk, and the Ukrainians are failing to try and take back the city. They took it back 3 days ago, by the way. Look, this is the 12th of this is the 17th of December, actually. This is the 16th, this is the 15th, this is the 14th, this is the... Actually, it was a lot longer than that. It was about a week ago. Like, it was almost a whole week ago. The Ukrainians took the city of Kupyansk, and a week later, they're still saying that they hold it. They don't hold it. So that is probably what Putin's being fed by everyone, is nothing but cheery news. The economy's doing fine, the military's doing fine, we're winning in every way, and if he's too lazy to not get off of his own ass and do his own research, he might actually believe these sheepish advisors that don't want to tell basically the modern version of Stalin that his plans are going poorly and they're unraveling before him. That's usually what happens in a dictatorship, actually, and this is nothing new. In China, during the reign of Mao Zedong, especially in the late, or Mao Zedong, as some people call him, so that way they don't say dong, because, whenever you say Mao Zedong, whenever people say Mao Zedong, there's always that person out there who's like, ha, Mao Zedong, and then it completely loses any seriousness, so I'll say Mao Zedong, but Mao Zedong, in the late 60s, started this campaign called the Great Leap Forward, which was supposed to be a massive campaign to industrialize China, a lot like the Soviet Union's 5-year plan that they did in the late 20s and the 30s. They did multiple 5-year plans, but this was basically China's version of a 5-year plan. In the first year alone, a whole bunch of peasants took their farming implements, like the hoes, not those, but the spades, the trowels, and they threw them into a foundry. And some Chinese peasants were out there going, not the hoes, but that's a whole other thing beyond that point. But beyond that, they melted down all of their farming implements, so they didn't have anything to farm with, and they turned it into the crappiest pig iron ever seen. It's a living legacy in China that still exists to this day. They call it that tofu dreg steel. But outside of that, it turned into an abysmal failure. But all of the provincial governors and officials, they didn't want to tell Mao that this has just completely failed. And also on top of that, they were going to be destroying their harvest because no one was even able to farm. So on top of that, Mao also said that there was a whole bunch of things that they did, and it all coalesced into the worst thing that's ever happened. And I'm not even kidding, it is the worst thing that's ever happened. I'll tell you all why in a second. But Mao also stated that they were going to war against sparrows, the birds in particular, because they ate crops. So the Chinese mass exterminated the sparrow in China. There was hardly one left alive within the course of just 6 months after that declaration. So they don't have any farming implements. So farming has to be done entirely by hand, which makes it incredibly laborious and very time consuming, meaning that crop yields are a lot smaller because the area of cultivated field is far smaller due to the amount of effort that's involved. And also on top of that, they had just killed off all the sparrows, which didn't seem like a big deal at first until the Chinese kind of learned that the sparrows ate the locusts, and without any sparrows to eat the locusts bred like rabbits basically, or like locusts, I guess, and they started a locust plague over the whole of Egypt. So the locusts ate all the remaining crops that they hardly were able to plant. So when the next year came around, a famine set in. Nobody told Mao. Not a soul told Mao. They were so scared of telling him that his entire plan had failed, the provincial officials just said everything was going fine. They would take the food from the provincial regions, and they would just bump it up to Beijing anyways, which literally left most everyone inside of the provincial regions that weren't in Beijing without any food at all. 40 million people starved over that next year as a result of that, until finally someone told Mao, this is going poorly, and people are starving in the provinces. This is very bad. And once they told
got to
him,
listen to those advisors, man. They got to listen to those advisors. Once leaders stop listening to the people that are supposed to keep them on the right track, it all goes sideways. And you can't put fear in them either, because if you put a chilling effect on them and they feel terrified to speak up, then you might as well not have advisors at all, because you're just going to collapse, basically.
yeah, I mean, honestly, man, that's absolutely true. And then after that, folks, Mao did something else even crazier. He said, mangoes are like kind of cool. And then someone in China saw a mango and they were like, I think it's kind of like okay looking. And because he didn't say it was the greatest thing he had ever seen on earth, the whole village went and beat the guy to death. So, I mean, that's what you get when you get people who don't listen to their advisors. You get people eventually beating each other to death over the fact that they said a mango kind of looked okay and it wasn't the greatest thing they'd ever seen. And you also get 40 million people that starved to death as a side note. So, generally, kind of showing that that's probably the situation that Putin's in at the moment is a lot like the one that Mao is in. All of his advisors just aren't telling him the truth of it. And I'm actually having to change my opinion, because I used to say that Putin probably knew full and well what situation Russia's in. I don't think he knows that, to be entirely honest now from what we're seeing. But a humongous thanks to you once again for the support, Brian Maddox, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope that does address that incredibly well. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running, and we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Joseph Carr, who puts in a $50 support. And thank you, Joseph, very much as well for that generous support. And Joseph said, what are the chances of Ukraine using these sub drones against Russian subs anywhere?
It's probably somewhat low, because we don't think that they have an incredibly long range. Most Ukrainian drones at the longest range that the Ukrainians have stated they have about a 1,000 mile long range. So if we were to measure that from the coastline, the furthest south we can get in Ukraine, and we measure that in a straight line and saw how far one of these drones could get, it's not going to make it too far, because it has to get through the Sea of Marmara, it has to get through the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. And let me try and get it out here to the open sea. It then has to get through the mire of islands in the Aegean. So let me move it on through here. And then we finally make it out to here. So this is about the farthest we think a Ukrainian drone can make it, is south of Crete. So it can't really strike Russian subs everywhere. If a Russian sub is within the Eastern Mediterranean, there's a possibility. But if it's really anywhere else, it would be out of range of a Ukrainian submersible drone at the moment. So unfortunately, it's going to have a somewhat more limited range, and also on top of that, living like a rock star kind of beat me to the punch on this. It's impossible for them to detect a Russian submarine, because for Ukraine to be able to detect a Russian submarine, they would have to fly a helicopter down there at a minimum 1,000 miles, and then start dropping sonar buoys in the Mediterranean. And that would take a lot of money. That's also equipment that they just don't have. And that would also take a lot of time. It'd be like searching for a needle in a haystack to find one of these things. And then you would have to hope that you could race a Ukrainian drone through the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles and the Sea of Marmara, which are heavily trafficked by ships, without colliding with one of them, to make it through the Aegean and then out into the Eastern Mediterranean to try and hit that sub. And by then it's probably gone, or it's completely moved on from where the sonar buoy was dropped. So in reality, it's going to be a fairly regional sort of a thing. They really would only be able to attack Russian subs in the port of Novorossyisk. They probably wouldn't even be able to attack them in the Black Sea, because once they leave the port, they're practically going to be indetectable for the Ukrainians due to their means and abilities for submarine detection. So I hope that does address that the best that we can. And a big thanks to you so much once again for that absolutely incredible support and helping us to keep this channel running. And with that, we are on to the final question of the segment, and then we're going to be getting on into the rest of the news at large.
All right, so our last one goes to Mark Ead, and thank you very much, Mark, for that also generous $50 support as well, and we do appreciate that very, very much. And Mark said, thank you, gentlemen. LSA from New Zealand.
Hey, and a huge thanks to Mark Ead, all the way from New Zealand. A really cool thing that you're supporting this channel massively. I gotta thank you humongously for enjoying this channel and helping us to keep it running. And a huge thank you for helping this channel to keep on rolling, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible. We might be on here singing Silver and Gold or something like that. You just never know. But beyond that, I gotta say a humongous thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, folks, it's time for us to move on and into the next bits of news. The rest of the news that we have for the rest of the night, as a matter of fact. And we've got quite a lot of it. So moving us on down into East Asia, we have been able to see some very interesting developments. Moving us on to Thailand, Cambodia, first off, the war is still going. Would y'all believe it, folks? It's been going for a while now. It's been going for about 2 weeks, with no end in sight. No ceasefire. The Malaysia Accords have completely collapsed. It's like we said it was going to happen. You know, I don't mean to sound like we're happy that a war is going on, but it is one thing that really does vindicate our analysis here on the channel, that when we say something, we usually have a little bit of enough knowledge or enough common sense to say how something's going to go. We said that that ceasefire was not going to fix anything, and the peace treaty still didn't fix the underlying issue, and believe it or not, it didn't, and that's why the casino war is still ongoing 2 weeks later. Moving us on down into the area of Trot, or at least around the area of, I believe it's the Priach Menhar region or something along those lines in Cambodia, the Cambodians apparently conducted a counterattack, and this was actually in the Mian Che district near Phnom Penh. Apparently they were able to capture an M4, some small arms ammo, and apparently some form of a Serbian ATGM, or an anti-tank launcher, one or the other. But we can see their clip right here. We can see a little pack, we can see a little ammo. And
they really got a catch there for them. That's a pretty big catch.
And oh my God, Matthew, it's an M4 carbine that appears to have its buffer broken. So,
good thing they don't have that in the United States. They'd be in some big trouble.
Man, I'll be honest with you. We can also see some mags, a helmet. I mean, I'm going to be honest with y'all, folks. I've seen better finds at a gun show. And this is supposed to be the
They're really proud of those, too. They're like just scanning back and forth, looking at it like, this is so nice. Look at this.
I'm not going to lie, folks. They're kind of like blowing this out of proportion for what it is. This is literally just an M4 and some belts of what looks to be 5.56. I don't know why they're acting like this is just the craziest thing that's ever been seen. Meanwhile, the Thai conducted an offensive today and ended up taking the Prasat Takwai temple along the Cambodian-Thai border. They showed themselves holding the temple today and having, after captured it, raised their flag over the temple. Okay, that guy may have stubbed his toe right there. Okay, he did it again.
Damn, I can't tell if they're injured or they're happy.
I don't think it's a good idea to group up in the dozens when you can literally hear the artillery fire in the distance.
Yeah, it's a stupid idea. Very stupid.
But I mean, they're hyped. I mean, they did take the place. So, you know, they took it and then they all grouped up so that way the Cambodians, if they had a mortar in the area, could hit them with one mortar round and take out about half the company. So they apparently did not die in the process of taking this video or afterwards. So that was kind of impressive in its own way. We also got to see some border clashes once again from the Cambodian POV. Are y'all ready for this? It doesn't matter. Y'all are going to have to watch it anyways. Why am I asking? Why am I asking? We're going to show it anyways. Here's the clip. Casually reloading a mag in the middle. Oh!
Oh, man. He's got no speed loader or anything. He's just doing it by hand. This is a bad time to be reloading mags.
Man, honestly, man, and he's kind of doing it really slowly, too, like, as slowly as he can. He's thinking that if he sits here and loafs off in this bunker, loading the mag, he might get out of the firefight outside. We now see that he's got his absolutely rinky-dink AK loaded, and I'll tell you why I'm calling this thing a rinky-dink AK. An AK is an AK, they're basically made with the same tolerances in every country, even if they're license built, but these AKs with the folding stock here, specifically the one that's the, like, brace stock, like that, these are absolutely terrible. They have this huge amount of wiggle in them, and I've actually held a couple of these before to see if I would even be interested in having one, and the answer is absolutely not. That little stock back there, it wiggles like hell. There really is no way to get this thing fixed on your shoulder in a good way to be able to aim down the sights properly, because that little back stock on every AK, it wiggles a whole lot because it's just designed with extremely low tolerances, so there's just this load of like free space or wiggle room in the thing, and I hate them for that reason. That's probably why the Cambodians shoot them gangster style, because I bet you that trying to aim down the stock of this thing is a nightmare. He's like, excuse me, I need to come through. He's like, oh, okay, you have your turn in the firefight now. Oh, half the position's on fire. Well, he came out of the bunker at the wrong time. They're now moving down the trench. And we now see him firing at gangster style, along with this guy firing an RPK gangster style as well. Nobody seems to aim down the sights in Cambodia. It's kind of just a spray and pray doctrine. Oh, wait a minute, hold up. Oh my god, dude. This guy almost knocked himself over. Not once, but twice from the recoil holding it that way. Look at him.
Look at him.
Oh, there we go. Hold up, here's another one. Oh, look at him. He almost lost his footing right there. So he rebounces. And then he does it again.
If he would shoulder the thing properly, he wouldn't have that problem. But, you know, shooting like a clown, that's what happens.
Yeah, that's absolutely ridiculous. Look at him. Now he's having to get down. He's having to think about how to fire a light machine gun now. Someone's screaming over the radio. These sandbags have mold growing on them.
Ew.
Man, honestly, I don't think that's up to FTA standard.
No, I don't think so.
No, not at all. This guy's now just sitting around. He's trying to figure out what's up. There's the other half of the position that's on fire right there. I'll be honest with y'all, I can't really tell where the firefight is because half of them are firing one way and half of them are looking over the trench the other way and firing back in the direction that it looks like they came from. So I don't know if they're surrounded or if they're conducting fratricide and also firing at the enemy simultaneously. It's really hard to tell. Also, that red lawn chair right there really does add to the scenery. Oh, he's getting ready to lay it down. Gangsta style. Oh!
Also, by the way, can you turn that down a little bit? Like, just like cut the volume in half or something? It's very loud. But I saw Seven Dragons say they have drone nets. And they do have drone nets, it appears like. They have them all over these trenches right here. Which, so far, I really haven't seen drones being used in this war very much. I think maybe they've used a recon drone like one time or so. But they're not using FPVs for attack drones as far as I'm aware. So that's kind of an interesting choice.
Man, it really is honestly a pretty interesting choice. And getting back to the firefighting, we see them getting ready to fire gangster style again over the trench. I guess that's the manual of arms of Cambodia, is to never shoulder a rifle. If you're shouldering a rifle, you're doing it wrong. So, now this guy's getting back down as well.
I wonder why these guys either side is using drones. That's kind of a strange thing that they aren't using them because, they've seen Ukraine. Everybody's seen how Ukraine and Russia has been using them, and it's not like the drones are hard to get. So it's kind of curious that they haven't adopted them.
The Thai and the Cambodians are using them in a limited capacity, but mostly for reconnaissance from what we know. So they are trying to use them, and it's kind of in their infancy, but it's nothing that's well fleshed out at this point. We see them just kind of looking around. You hear the crackling of half of the trench burning down over there on the right. See them kind of just conversating here for a minute. Artillery landing nearby. Honestly, I think these guys want to clock out of the job and just kind of go on lunch. They don't really seem that heavy into the firefight. So you see him trying to scoot by again. He's going down the trench. It's filled with trash, by the way. The whole floor is made of trash in this thing. And the guy's just chilling. And he's literally just chilling till the end of this clip. So, a little bit interesting with that, and not really a lot going on in this clip. But moving on from that, and on out of that news, we are going to be moving on out of the Thailand-Cambodia war, as it is still raging at the moment, and it does appear that the Thai generally still have the advantage in the ground fighting at the moment against the Cambodians. We did see, however, that the Cambodians are apparently being trained by the Chinese. In China, of all places. Look at them wearing PLA gear.
World? How in the world are they going to train them in China? And they're going to show up on the battlefield acting like they're acting. Like the Cambodians are like a clown militia at this point. It's like a joke. It's like, are they really getting training from China and then going back and acting like that?
Apparently.
Apparently.
Man, I tell you, man. Oh, look at them. The beautiful gear.
Oh, man, there. He turned around and looked at the camera.
We see them getting into these beautiful Chinese APCs, probably the most ugly ones ever made. And now they're riding through a field at very slow speed. It's a cornfield, actually. I've heard that the Cambodians, they like a good piece of corn. A good ear of corn. That's literally a cornfield in the middle of the training ground. And we see them firing an ATGM through the corn. Oh, so that really is how they're taught? Oh, wait a minute, that guy's clearing a jam. I was about to say, is that really how they're taught to shoot? I was like, is that really how they do it? Apparently not. He just had to clear out a jam, it seems. Yeah, he was clearing out a jam for sure. He had taken the mag out and everything. So, I hate those bullpups that the Chinese have. I think it's like a QBZ-86 or something like that. They're terrible.
Hell, the Chinese better hope they can fight better than the Cambodians, because if they're on par with this, and this is how the Chinese think a war is fought, they're going to be in trouble.
Man, I'm not going to lie, man. It's not really putting a lot of faith, in my opinion, in the abilities of the People's Liberation Army, or any other branch of the People's Liberation Army, for that matter. Like the People's Liberation Army Navy, or the People's Liberation Army Air Force, or the People's Liberation Army Navy Marine Corps, or the People's Liberation Army, so on and so forth. You know, you get the point. I don't think they're going to be doing that well if that's how they train the Cambodians to fight. Additionally, we also were able to hear that the United States of America just approved $11 billion to Taiwan. And what is it in detail? Well, we got the breakdown. $4 billion of it is going to be for HIMARS systems. $4 billion is going to be for M109A7 self-propelled howitzers. $1.1 billion will be for the Altius autonomous air vehicles. $1 billion will be for tactical mission network software. $375 million will be for Javelin missiles. $353 million will be for TOW-2Bs. $96 million will be for AH-1W helicopter parts, and $91 million will be for Harpoon anti-ship missile refurbishments.
Wow,
This
wait a
is
minute. That Altius autonomous air vehicles, I believe that's an Anduril creation. Actually, I think is that one of the first contracts they've gotten for the Altius. I'm not totally sure about that, but that's an entire $1 billion. That's a big contract right there. I think that is the Anduril Altius.
Man, it might be. It might be. I don't really know. I don't really follow Anduril a lot or most of their systems. Probably should, but I don't. But beyond that, it's interesting to note, outside of that, folks, that most of this, $8 billion of it, is for artillery systems, M109s and HIMARS. And I gotta say, folks, I don't really know if that's the greatest thing that could be given to them, because primarily the most important thing for Taiwan to get now, if we're talking about immediate preparations to try and turn their island into a fortress that is to be besieged, would be air defense systems and anti-ship missiles. And this didn't really provide much of either of those, to be entirely honest with y'all. It gave $91 million for Harpoon anti-ship missile refurbishments, but that's the only thing that deals with anti-air or anti-ship equipment systems or weapon systems. It's a little bit interesting with that, because it's generally understood, folks, that if the Chinese army lands on shore in Taiwan, it's definitely going to be a losing war from there, and there probably isn't going to be that much longer for Taiwan to survive. So really, the war is to be fought, from what we know, in the skies and the seas around the island, and if it's lost there, it's basically lost altogether. So I don't know why we're putting so much effort into getting them a massive HIMARS and M109s, because I guess the idea is that instead of stopping the Chinese from reaching the island, we're going to obliterate them. Well, the Taiwanese will obliterate them when they land on the island, but it's a little bit odd that that appears to be what we're apportioning the funds for. If I was the one who was apportioning the funds, I would have said that about $8 billion went towards anti-ship missiles and anti-ship launchers, as well as anti-air systems and launchers as well. That would have been what I would have apportioned the funds for, because that would have made a lot more sense, considering that for the Chinese to ever begin a ground invasion, they first have to defeat the Taiwanese air defense systems, and then they also have to defeat the anti-ship systems as well, to be able to open up a window to be able to conduct an amphibious land again. So a little bit interesting with how they apportion the funds, but still good to see that we are still giving significant support and congressional drawdowns to Taiwan. Unfortunate that we're not seeing the same for Ukraine. I mean, $11 billion in a single year to the Ukrainians would be quite nice, to be entirely honest, but apparently Taiwan can get $11 billion from Congress, but Ukraine still is a little bit sorely missed on that at the moment. But a lot of people have been talking about this action and whether it's good or not. Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking as well?
All right, so we did see that apparently an $11 billion military package is working its way through approval for Taiwan amid the escalations that China is taking against Japan right now over the Taiwan situation. And what are your thoughts about that? 56% said that's a very good move by the United States, while 21% said it's good, but China will retaliate as a result. And 17% said that's simply too much money for Taiwan. So, me personally, I'm a strong believer in making sure that we deter the enemies from taking action against allies. I think this is a good move, but like the enforcer was mentioning though, I would like to see similar actions being taken toward Ukraine, because if we can approve $11 billion for Taiwan, when there's not even an active war going on, then how come we can't support Ukraine with more than $800 million and make sure they keep fighting the war? So I'm not totally sure about the logic behind it, but I'm glad they're doing it for Taiwan at least. I was a bit worried that maybe we're going to abandon Taiwan, but it looks like maybe that won't be the case. Also, by the way, I'm not really sure what triggered this out of the blue, because like I had mentioned, it did not sound like the U.S. was that close behind Taiwan until today. So I guess maybe they've heard something bad. Maybe it's the whole situation with Japan and China that's got them taking this action all of a sudden. But I would say it's a good move. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that it is a pretty decent move, but I would say that it could have been a lot better in what's being apportioned to them, just to be entirely honest. I don't mean to criticize a horse gift or whatever it is, whatever the phrase is.
Look a gift horse in the mouth.
Yeah, look a gift horse in the mouth and all that. I don't mean to do that, but at the same time, folks, I don't really understand why we're giving them so much in terms of artillery systems when we really need to be giving them air defense and anti-ship systems. If we give them those, the army doesn't even matter. And that's how Taiwanese doctrine works. Their army hardly matters, at least in their ground fighting capabilities, because it's understood they're never really going to fight a ground war unless if it's in defense, and that's a last-ditch effort. They are going to win their battle or lose it in the sea and in the skies around the island. So what's most important for them is air defense systems and also, most importantly, anti-ship systems. And they're not getting either of them, really. We're just giving them some refurbishments on their existing fleet of Harpoon's anti-ship missiles, and those aren't even that far range. Those only have a 75-mile range, and we do have to understand that the Chinese can conduct strikes on Taiwan from their mainland, which is about 140 to 150 miles away. So it's a little bit interesting that that's the case, and I would have to say that as far as the apportionment, it could have been done a lot better. But I also have to clarify, folks, that we've been misquoting this for a second. I saw Maddie clarifying it, so I'll make a clarification on air. This is actually a weapons sales package, so this is what we're willing to sell them in a money amount, and this is their max, basically, on the credit card of what they can buy with their own money in each amount from the United States. So, a little bit interesting with that, but still, it's okay, but I think we could be doing a lot better. Also, I see some people saying that the HIMARS is anti-ship capable. From what I understand, it's not. If there is a missile out there being worked on that's not been fielded in mass numbers, I just went and looked off air while Matthew was talking about his opinion on it. There is no system like that. The HIMARS is generally a ground-based, ground-to-ground weapon. It is not an anti-ship system, and most likely would be pretty difficult to pull that off. Most HIMARS missiles only have a range of about 50 miles. The ATACMS has a range of about 350, but an ATACMS can only be fired one at a time from a HIMARS, which generally an anti-ship system operating at its best efficiency would usually carry around 4 anti-ship missiles at a time. That's usually the international standard. So it wouldn't really be that good of an anti-ship system, considering it only has 1 missile per launcher, if it's using an ATACMS-sized rocket. And if it has 6 GMLRS sized rockets or normal MLRS rockets that are used in the HIMARS, then it would have 6, but they would only be limited to a range of about 50 to 75 miles, which makes them even shorter range than a Harpoon. And also probably a pretty good bit slower, or about as slow as a Harpoon, considering that a Harpoon is subsonic. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And moving on out of Taiwan, folks, it's time for us to move on and into the major news that we have coming out of Europa. We have a lot of news coming out of Europa, and so we're going to be making sure to get into it in every bit of detail that we can. Moving us on into Germany, we were able to hear that Friedrich Merz has confirmed that the Germans intend to use Russian assets to finance the armed forces of Ukraine for at least 2 more years. This step is not about prolonging the war, but about bringing the war to an end as soon as possible. Very good to hear from Friedrich Merz, and it's showing us that the Germans are still dedicated to supporting Ukraine well on into the future, even using frozen Russian assets to do so. Additionally, we have also been able to hear that the Poles are apparently going to be starting their anti-personnel mine production for the first time since the Cold War. Very interesting to see, and apparently production will be beginning in 2026, and this was after, just about 2 months or 3 months ago, Poland withdrew from the 1997 Ottawa Convention. This is generally a move for Polish defense. They're wanting to try and create pretty much death zones for the Russians or certain lines of advance. So they're going to probably start mining most of their border with Belarus and Russia and leaving some areas demined, like areas down major highways. So that way, when the Russians attack, they're pretty much fed directly into a bottleneck, and the Polish will have a much easier time dealing with an attacking force, considering that there's a very limited angle that they can attack from. Otherwise, they're going to have to spend a long time trying to clear a minefield where they will mostly be detected by reconnaissance, and then they'll start to come under fire, making it incredibly difficult to try and pass through those areas and greatly slowing or limiting the abilities of a Russian opening offensive once Poland starts to lay out these anti-personnel and anti-vehicular landmines.
That'll be quite interesting. That'll be quite interesting for Poland to mine the border that they have with Belarus, because there's still the ongoing problem of Russia getting together these large groups of migrants, and they'll send them into Belarus, and then Belarus basically prods them toward the border with Poland, and they do that intentionally. It's been shown time and time again that Russia's funding this and also facilitating it. So now that Poland's going to be mining the border with Belarus, I wonder how that's going to have an impact with that whole migrant thing, with the migrants running toward the border, because I wonder how they're going to mine it with that happening.
Man, I wonder, honestly. Apparently, folks, if the Belarusians try and prod the migrants to run across the border again, we're going to be hearing explosions around the border, maybe. So we'll have to see how that goes. But that's quite interesting, to say the least. But moving on from that and on into the Russian Federation, or as they call it, the Rossiysk Federacji. That's how you actually say it in Russian. We are going to be moving on into Moscow. We have gotten a lot of news today out of Moscow. And you know, Matthew, I actually heard, Matthew, that there was a cow once. A cow that stood in a field for an incredibly long amount of time. It was stupid and inactive, and it wasn't really able to achieve any of its goals. It was so bad at achieving anything that it could hardly even move. And because it was so stationary for such a long time, it started to grow moss on itself. And thus, a Russian prince called Rinky-Dink the Wise declared the city Moscow to come into existence. And since this day, the Russians have carried on the very ethos of that cow itself that was found within the very center of Moscow where the Kremlin was built. That whole story is BS, by the way, just in case y'all didn't know. But moving us on into the details and news out of the Russian Federation, apparently Putin has said today that they're going to be taking ground by any means. He said that Russia will take historic lands by force if needed. Now, that's also very interesting as well, because, you know, Russia's historic lands aren't just limited to Ukraine. It's limited to most of Eastern Europe. That's crazy, folks. It's like we've been saying that for years. And it's like all those people who keep saying that, oh, you know, where in the world is Putin saying that he's going to take back all of Russia's former lands? Well, I mean, he said it today, and he said it a lot of times in the past few years. Let me go pull y'all up a map of the Russian Empire. Let me go show y'all that really quickly. A little imperial endeavor here. Let's take a little gander, shall we? Let's take a look. Ah, yes. This was the Russian Empire at its peak in Europe. Notice that Finland's included, along with the Baltic states, all of Belarus, pretty much all of Ukraine, except for this little piece down here, Moldova, and also a large part of Poland. So basically the whole of Eastern Europe, everything up to Germany, the Russians want to claim as their own. And they're saying that they're going to take it back hell nor high water. That's the claim, and it appears that Putin is once again making it pretty obvious that his ambitions don't lie just within Ukraine, but over the whole of Eastern Europe. Moving on from that, we have also been able to hear that apparently the Russians have stated that their first S-500 is now active in the 1st Regiment equipped with the S-500. I'm not shocked, and I'm not really impressed by this. The S-500, if it performs as well as the S-400, is going to do quite poorly.
Also, by the way, I heard that Turkey is apparently trying to give the S-400 back. You know that one that Putin was trying to repurchase back from Erdogan because they were running out of S-400s? Apparently, Turkey's like, okay, you can have that back, because I think Turkey's trying to move toward Western air defense systems because they're not really so sure about the Russian equipment anymore. So, you know, how can they have an S-500 and brag about it when they can't even keep up with manufacturing the older or the other model, the S-400?
It's because, Matthew, Russia only exists in the propaganda sphere, and beyond that, they practically don't exist in any real way. So I have a feeling that this thing is going to be quite disappointing in actual use. We also have been able to hear that, before we get to that bombshell one, I'm actually going to move this one over here so that we can remember it, actually right here at the end. Moving on into our next statement by Putin, he has stated today... And I'll just let y'all hear it. Here you go. Let's just listen to it.
Тем не менее, не лишним, мне кажется, будет и повторить. Сразу же после развала Советского Союза, а тогда нам казалось, что мы очень быстро станем членами так называемой цивилизованной семьи европейских народов, вообще цивилизованной западной семьи. Сегодня выясняется, что никакой цивилизации там нет, там только деградация все.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Holy
man.
degradation. What's he talking about, man? Putin's sounding greasier than the fries from Five Guys. You know how the bag's like full of grease, like on the sides of it and stuff like that? Like it lines the bag. This dude is sounding greasy right now. But what the hell is he even talking about? Like no civilization there. I mean, the West isn't sending their young men into a meat grinder every single day and letting them die by the hundreds of thousands, but Russia is. What kind of culture is that?
Oh, man. I got so much to unpack here, folks. Oh, man, I'm going to have a blast with this one. All right, so, first off, he says that there's no civilization here. What's he wearing, folks? What's he wearing? Matthew, tell me, what is he wearing?
What is he wearing?
Well, what is he wearing? I mean, look at him.
I can't see.
Oh, he's wearing a suit. Where in the world do suits come from?
Everywhere.
The United Kingdom. That's generally where they came from. So, that seems to be a little bit of civilization that they took. If you look at those microphones, if I remember correctly, it wasn't the Russians that made the microphones. It was actually generally European inventors. I believe it was actually a French inventor that created the first one, and then the Americans kind of took it and ran with it. But generally, the West made microphones. If we look at the uniform of Valery Gerasimov over here, he'll become important in a minute. If you look at his uniform, it has a very Western style to it. It doesn't have a traditional Russian style to it. That's for damn sure. Have y'all seen traditional Russian clothes? Probably not. You know the last time that the Russians had traditional Russian clothes and that their upper echelons of society wore them? The mid-1600s to the late 1600s. Since then, they've practically had to try and copy and mimic the West in every single way to make themselves look like they're even modern. They're not. Everything that they have in Russia is borrowed from the West. Let's think about it. Automobiles. Where in the world was the automobile invented? It was invented in Germany by Carl Benz. Then the automobile was mass-produced here in the United States. The light bulbs inside of that building, where in the world were those made? Generally inside the West, usually in France or Britain, where the filaments were first experimented with, and then the carbon filament was the one that Thomas Edison was able to finally get into mass production. So the room is lit by Western civilization. The LED screens back there, if I remember correctly, I don't think a Russian invented that. I think that some folks here in the West invented LED screens like the one behind them. And I'd also have to say that, generally speaking, basically everything in the room is from the West. At least in concept, its invented or origin, or maybe even its production. So it's a little bit funny that you would say that there's no civilization. And on top of that, let's just think about the civilization that exists in Europe versus Russia. In Europe, we have the play, we have the opera, we have all sorts of different forms of mediums of entertainment. We have orchestral music. We have all of that. Do you hear of Russian instruments being existent in an orchestra nowadays? No. Do you even hear of them existent in Russian orchestras? Very rarely. The only one that they hardly use, and it hardly use it even now, is the balalaika. They hardly even use that, and that's just to put a little Russian flair to their pretty much completely westernized orchestra that they have inside of their country. The choir, for that matter, generally that's something that is normally universal, but specifically the Russian choirs took a lot of inspiration from Western choirs of the 19th century. Nothing in Russia is Russian. It's all a mimicry of what we've done here in the West in every single way. And then they have the gall to tell us that we don't have civilization or culture. They literally copy us to the insane degree. It's unreal. And they want to keep on pushing that and have people here in the West believe that. And I bet you that Putin will go and probably eat a French inspired dish here after this meal too, or an Italian one at least, because Russian food tastes like garbage. We also were able to hear that apparently at the same time, he also called European leaders swine, and has stated that they ought to ultimately lose power. It does seem that Putin is generally pissed off today, and he's kind of on the warpath because one of his precious subs got obliterated. And Matthew, what are people thinking about his great insults to Western civilization? Is that some sort of a war narrative, or is it just an insult?
All right, so we did hear that Putin today, he is big mad. I would assume that he's out here making statements like this, which are extremely, extremely inflammatory, because he is pissed off and angry that he just lost $500 million submarine in his own port, and then they had to sink ships to try to protect them and block all their ships into the port. That's probably why he's a little bit hangry out here, is because he's losing money and also he's losing support. But Putin's claiming that there is no civilization in the West, only degradation. And it's just a war narrative. And 53% said it simply insults to the West, nothing more than that. And 39% said, yes, it demonizes the West in preparations for a war. And 5% said, I'm 50-50 on this one. And I'll be honest, I think that it demonizes the West for war, because it's not based in reality, by the way. I see some people in the chat saying, well, oh, he's talking about immigration. I mean, are we really going to do that? I mean, Putin grabs on like certain things. Yes, the West has issues, but to say there's no civilization in the West, only degradation, it's like, well, we're, like I mentioned earlier, we're not sending hundreds of thousands of young men off to die in a war that they started illegally inside of a foreign country. So, I think we're a little bit different on that front, quite a bit. And also, look at this. Here's the street. This right here, I mean, this is technically civilization, but it's like tier like 10, I guess you could say. Like it's near the bottom. This isn't what you'd call like the streets of like France or something like that. Like for example, when the Russian propagandists say that allegedly Zelensky has houses in Rome, they don't say he has like 10 houses in Moscow. They say Rome because Rome is like a hell of a lot nicer. So, even the propagandists in Russia don't buy it. They don't say that they have luxury apartments in Moscow, except for the oligarchs. But Enforcer, what say you?
Also, they have tank traps around the police station in this town for some reason. I think that might be telling us about the high rates of crime and violence here, considering that they're having to stop people from, like, land blasting themselves straight into the side of the police building at full speed with a vehicle. So I think that might be giving us a bit of a better indicator of what's going on here. But this is what the Russians claim, folks, is civilization. Now, I gotta be honest with y'all, I've seen some rough places here in America. But this is about as bad as they get. And this is what Russia considers to be standard right here. This is downtown in the middle of Arzamas, which is in Western Russia. So this is about the best it gets for most people in Russia. That looks far worse off than what we have at our worst here in America. It's not really a good look. And I'd have to say that it's just a raw insult. And I also got to say that this whole thing about, like, I just gotta be honest, folks. I'm not talking about this in a political vein. I'm just going to talk about it on the conversational depth of it. The whole thing about the West has no civilization because immigration, because they're bringing in people who aren't European, so they're destroying themselves, is a little bit stupid, considering that the Russians are killing off their people in the hundreds of thousands, and in their stay, they're also doing the same thing. So where in the world do the Russians...
And they're doing it intentionally. They're literally doing it intentionally, and it's because of that same reason right there, like you mentioned. It's because Putin's like killing off all the young men. That's why they're having to do that. It's insane if you really think about it. That, folks, we have to wake up. Like, I'm not saying that there's not a problem, by the way. Like, there's problems. The West has problems and things like that. Not saying there isn't, but to say, like, to hear Putin say something like that, like, oh, there's no civilization because they have some immigration problems, and then people are like, yeah, he's right. I agree with Putin. It's like, it's propaganda. Like, he's saying that for propaganda. And it's crazy to me that so many Westerners will hear that and think Russia has all the answers because he said that. It's like, well, nobody denied there was a problem. And there's some people out there that do, but it's like, what are we going to start agreeing with a genocidal dictator because people think there's an immigration problem? It's like, that's crazy talk.
It's absolutely stupid. And also on top of that, it doesn't make any sense because everything that he says is just not even true. Like look at any argument that Russia makes. Let's see. Let me think of one. The immigration deal. They're getting their people intentionally killed in Ukraine, and then they're replacing them with immigrants. And and it's not like, oh, they're replacing, like I don't know what it is, but for some reason the whole immigration thing takes on a racial tone. Like, people are fine with European immigration, but they're not with from other countries. But people say in the United States, oh, immigration from India and elsewhere is destroying the United States. Don't y'all know that when a Russian soldier dies in Ukraine, they just replace him and basically his whole family with an Indian immigrant or a Central African immigrant or something else? It's literally the same thing they are saying the West is doing, but they're doing it intentionally. They're literally getting their people killed in a war and then having immigrants come in and take their place. Like, here in the West, it's just an abstract idea. It's like, oh, people are immigrating, but the U.S. government isn't, well, no government in the West is actively going out of their way to kill millions of Americans or Europeans or anything for that matter. It's just that immigrants are coming in, and it's kind of starting to upset the social order, if there ever was one. Meanwhile, in Russia, they're going, yes, we're literally killing off hundreds of thousands, if not millions of our people, and we're also replacing them with immigrants as well. So they are literally doing exactly what they claim the West is doing in real time in front of everyone right now. And it's like that with everything else.
Yeah, it's like all the people out there that like listen to Putin's propaganda and they're like, he's right, Putin's right. It's like, well, it's like, so what? It's like, what does Putin have all the good ideas now? It's like, what are you advocating for Putin to, like, he has all the answers, let's put him in charge? It's like, I don't even understand the people that think like that. It's like, Putin isn't saying that because he cares about Europe. He's saying that because he wants you to turn against your government and basically go against your own people. That's why he's saying that. He's trying to find any little issue that may cause a problem in Europe, and they may be sometimes legitimate issues, but then he says it like he cares about Europe. If he cares about Europe, then why is he invading Ukraine? And also, why is he threatening to go in and take everybody out inside of all these other countries? It's like that people, some people out there just can't be helped when it comes to like propaganda like that. They just want to believe that there's an alternative narrative that they're keeping secret from us. It's silly talk.
And also, I saw someone say, where in the world's the proof for what you're saying? I've never seen that before. We literally showed on the news here on the channel several days ago pictures of lines of workers from India and Central Africa going to clock in to work at oil refineries in Russia because most of the oil refinery workers that were Russian have died in Ukraine because they were drafted. Like, it's not something that's just buried out there. We've literally shown the picture proof of it here on the channel. Hell, like a decent bit of the Russian army now is made up of mercenaries that have been employed from places like India and Central Africa. Like literally what they say the West is doing in every way, they do it. Like people sit there and say, oh, here in the West, people are into debauchery. They're into drugs and adultery. Do y'all not know how high the HIV rate is in Russia? It's one of the highest in the world. I mean, if that isn't showing something, I mean, I don't know what would. I mean, it's literally a medical statistic that they put out, and it's exceptionally high there. And then on top of that, they have such a problem with alcoholism that tens of thousands of Russians die every year from alcoholism. They literally die from drinking themselves to death. Here in America, that's practically unheard of. You would usually have to get on fentanyl to die from some sort of abuse of some substance. In Russia, they literally just die from booze alone. I mean, if that's not a problem, I don't know what is. So everything that they say about the West, they have that problem, and it's either the same or it's worse. So I don't know where in the world they're getting the moral high ground to talk of. And also on top of that, considering that they have basically no culture and they're a ripoff of the Western world, I don't really listen to people who are Western ripoffs in backwater countries lecturing us here in the West about what we're supposed to be doing, considering that their entire existence is an imitation of our greatness. So I don't really listen to them that much on that topic, just to be entirely honest with y'all. But I saved the icing on the cake for last. Well, two icings on the cake. One, oil per barrel in Russia has hit a record low. It's never been this low in history. And currently, we understand that the Russians are going to be going broke over this because the Russian oil companies are surviving on these barrels of oil in price remaining high. It's now reached such a low that there's no way that they'll be able to make a profit off of selling these barrels. So they're going to be going broke. And there goes most of the Russian economy with it. Now, it's time for us to move on into the war in Ukraine, and this is going to be the best segue that I've ever had for the war in Ukraine, which is a frontline statement from Gerasimov. According to Gerasimov, or I'm sorry, Belousov today, he has stated, and I just want to read this off here because I don't believe... Yeah, it does not have subtitles, so let me make sure to read this off. The group forces west captured the strategically important city of Kupyansk, which the enemy is unsuccessfully trying to reclaim. The Ukrainians took Kupyansk nearly a week ago, and the Russians today, according to Belousov, claim that they're not only in complete control of the city, the Ukrainians are not taking it back. Let me go...
What the hell?
Right here. There we go. What?
I mean, this is a crazy statement. I'm just in disbelief.
Oh, I thought you were saying what the hell about me flipping the Flight Radar 24. I was like, what did I miss?
No, no, I was talking about the statement.
But this is Kupyansk today. There's some Russians trapped in the city, but the Ukrainians control the entire thing and have pushed the Russians all the way back to where they were a year ago, which is at Liman Pershi. Belousov is claiming they still hold the city and the Ukrainians are unsuccessfully attempting to retake it. They couldn't be more detached from reality. So we're going to move on into the front lines today. We're going to show you how detached from reality they really are. So moving us on into our location unknowns, we were able to see that today an Akhmat armored car, these are very rare these days, was blown up by an anti-tank mine and was lost.
Oh wow, they took the wheels straight off of it. It's like the car landed in Chicago or something. They took the wheels, they took the radio, they took the radiator. Hell, they even took the metal.
Man, I gotta say, that is wild.
That is wild. Ugly ass truck.
Man, beater ass truck. Man, they built it to look like a beater.
Oh man, losses on losses.
Moving on from that, we also got another clip showing a Russian drone taking out a Ukrainian car. And you see the drone closing on in as fast as it can. And sadly, folks, you're about to watch these Ukrainian soldiers have a final moment. Boing! And it bounced off. Oh, man, they can't even get the FPV drones to work right. They literally ricocheted an FPV right off the roof of a Ukrainian car. But you see it losing control.
The car was made of rubber on the roof.
Man, maybe. And this gave the Ukrainians, by the way, folks, enough time to successfully bail out So everyone in the vehicle ended up surviving, from what we understand. Very fortunate for them, and also it's hilarious to see how badly the Russians can even screw up an FPV drone attack, which is very simple. You hit the back of the car. End of story. They could even mess that up somehow. So luckily, those Ukrainian soldiers survived. Moving on from that, we also got to see the Russian casualty report as well for the day, and it was insane. And look, a bobcat! Oh!
A whole bobcat, a whole one. I'm not talking about a half. I'm not talking about a scrimpy portion. I'm talking about a whole bobcat. But tell us more.
Man, I'm
Oh,
telling
down
you.
the troop losses, though.
Man, I mean, the troop losses, man, were crazy today. And according to Ms. Decent, keeper of the records, 1,730 troops is the 15th highest daily loss, tied with 4 others dating back to last winter. Increases in APCs and a drop in UAVs. Other categories are at or above averages. Typo, submarine total is actually 2, with a +1 yesterday, which we thank Ms. Decent for correcting. Over the past 24 hours, 1,730 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed, along with 21 APCs, 179 supply trucks, 6 main battle tanks, 33 artillery pieces, 167 drones, 1 MLRS, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and 1 Bobcat skid steer. Today was an incredibly good day, and we're about to be getting on into the front lines and showing y'all a little bit more of why. Moving us on down the front and into the area of Kadivka, we were able to see an artillery depot getting hit within the area. Take a little look. And as we're watching this clip, it appears that we actually have breaking news coming out. What do we got, Matthew?
So we have some news that is breaking right now. It's breaking everything. They said, look, breaking news, breaking news. But here's the breaking news, folks. We were talking earlier about the National Defense Authorization Act. It's currently on its way to the president's desk. And we were talking earlier about if it's going to get vetoed or not. And the NDAA has some interesting provisions in it that actually favors Ukraine to a certain degree. But it looks like the White House schedule has just dropped for tomorrow, and it has on the schedule in the Oval Office at 6 p.m. the president will sign the National Defense Authorization Act. So everything that's in there apparently is going to be accepted by the president, at least according to what we're seeing on the schedule, and it will be signed. So it looks like it'll be going through.
And that is incredibly good news, everyone. Great news! Great news! And so now that the news has been broken, we thank Enforcer Matt for sharing that with us, and it's time for us to move into our next bit of news near to the Bakhmut front, or as we call it nowadays, the Konstantinivka front, as we found the Russians in their brand new movie, Saving Private Water. Here in Russia, the Russian soldiers have to drink out of puddles made of snow to find any water. Here we can see them trying to find some, with no avail.
I feel like this guy could moonlight as like the Hunchback of Notre Dame if he wasn't a soldier.
Quasimodo, man, like get your ass up in that bell tower. Oh man, I'm telling you.
What's this other guy doing, shaking the bottle like that? He's like, "Do you have any spare change?"
Spare change, man. Honest, bro. Look at him. He's like, it's just like, bro. He got messed up instantly, dude. Look at, he's like, delicious water.
Man.
Oh God.
Damn. Oh my God, man, it was instant poison damage, like minus 50 HP, like right off the bat. That's crazy, honest. That must have been some putrid water for him to he literally hunched over immediately.
Man, he turned into that guy from SpongeBob when SpongeBob was like, "Excuse me, does the smell of my breath bother you?" And he's like, "Not at all, boy." Bro, that was him after he drank the water. Oh my God.
Man, I'll tell you what, that other guy thought he had a brain worm. That Russian right there hadn't. He's like, "Damn, check this brain worm out." It was like an instant. It was like a hypersonic brain worm, went straight to the brain.
Man, dude, that Russian is like, "Oh, это вода. Oh, это хорошо. I drank the water and it really effed me up real bad." Like, man, he's like, "Help me, oh God." But
I'll tell you what, I was expecting the Russian to get on all fours and run off like a werewolf there in a second.
Man, dude, he does the swarm commands now. But moving on down into Konstantinivka, we also got to see the Ukrainians taking a good shot at an FPV. Oh, he whipped out the Brin. Oh, get him!
Wow. They got that 4D audio.
Man, they got that ultra surround sound. Oh, you hear it getting close. Oh, he got it.
Pretty solid. Somebody else is shooting at it too, it sounds like.
No, actually, that was the explosion of the drone. He hit it, it fell to the ground, and then it blew up. Like you could hear the battery pop in air when he hit it. It happened right after the shot, and then you could hear the explosion of the drone hitting the ground in the second after that. Listen to it. Listen to this. That shot, you could then hear right afterwards the sound of something exploding on the drone, maybe the battery, and then after that, you could hear the drone explode.
Yeah, I got you now. I hear it.
Man, what a shot. I mean, pretty impressive stuff right there. From, let's see, Oleg Petrosiuk. Very good job by Oleg. He did a great piece of work right there. Really impressive marksmanship. Moving us on down into Pokrovsk. Y'all know what makes sense, folks, is that when the Russians advance down a highway of death, right here into Pokrovsk City. You know what makes the most sense, folks, is that when the first wave got obliterated, about 4 days later, they do it again, and they literally drive through the remains of the last attempted assault on the street. You can see the remains of the vehicles that were used in that last assault. We actually covered that here on the channel, and the 155th is about to take out the second one that's attempted down this very same highway. Oh, there goes one. We're starting it off strong.
That's a bummer.
Oh, here goes another. Here goes a third. Third time's the charm. Oh, a fourth one. A whole score of them. Oh, look, more of them.
What do you even do in this situation? I mean, what do you even do? I mean, there's not like you can go run off because there's nowhere to run off to. There's hardly any trees. You're just in a wide open. You got no EW. You're just out here.
Bro, they're just out there vibing. I mean, you know, it didn't go well. And I can't really show you all the rest of the clip, but suffice to say, they didn't make it out. So this entire assault wave was also wiped out as well. A lot like the last one that went down this very same road in the very same spot, and these guys drove right through the remains of the last failed attack. Moving us on down into the area of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, a small area that the Russians have made ground in, we were also able to see that apparently the Ukrainians found a single Russian. They said, oh, look, a Russian! And then they obliterated the whole building.
Whoa, what the hell? What kind of munition was that again?
They mined the building, so apparently they either tunneled under it or they threw a bunch of bombs in the basement of the building before they left it, and then when the Russians came in, they detonated it.
That is crazy. I literally saw, like, dug a hole in the ground, basically. It threw the dirt in the air.
Oh yeah, this thing made a crater for sure.
That's wild.
Man, that's the Ukrainian response to one Russian entering the building. They said, oh, but shit, like, and then they blew up half the block.
I mean, look at that plume. It's like consuming the whole place. I've never seen a plume like that.
Man. Also, Puke Claw asked, did they get him? I'm not really sure. I don't know. I mean, you know, the size of the explosion, the radius and everything, I mean, it only covered half the city. They might have missed. They might have to do it a second time in the other part of the city just to make sure, you know, just to doubly make sure. But moving on out of that clip, it's now time for us to move on out of the Zaporizhzhia front and on into Rostov-na-Donu, a great city on the Don River. You know, the Don River is one hell of a spot to be in, at least. It's very interesting. It's kind of fun and entertaining. You know, it's a good spot, and they have a good song, actually. Really, it's actually called Rostov-na-Donu, would you believe it? It's named after the city. But, most importantly, folks, we have to talk about what happened down in the town just south of it, at Bataysk. You know, man, I remember that there was a time. Matthew, reminisce with me here for a minute. Reminisce with me. Just sit down and think of memory lane. I remember at one time in the summer of 2023, the Wagner took the town with no resistance, took the entire Southern Command's headquarters in the city, and then they drove right across that bridge, right down to Bataysk, and then drove down here onto the M4 highway and met the Chechens head on. And the Chechens did nothing to them when Kadyrov was claiming they were going to slaughter them all just literally 2 hours earlier. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that too. Do you know what would have happened if Prigozhin would have gotten his way with all this stuff right here? He was in Rostov-on-Don. Do you know what they'd have renamed the city to? Like, by the way, if he'd actually got to hold it?
Nutsack on Don?
No, they would have called it Prigozhin on Putin before it was over with, because he was really putting a number on him. Honestly, they would have renamed the place Prigozhin on Putin, or Nutsack on Putin, if you want to be extra graphic with it. But it would have been ugly times. That was honestly really crazy. Like when you think back about that whole situation, like in the moment you didn't realize how crazy it really was. Like you kind of did, but like looking back on it, that was a nuts. Like Putin's power was actually challenged, and unfortunately, I'm not sure we're going to see something of that magnitude again, honestly.
Man, it's a sad thing that we probably won't for a while at least, but that was one hell of a thing, folks. To have a mutiny happen like that in the first year and a half of a war, unheard of. The French started to have big mutinies in like 1917, but that was after 3 full years of war in World War I. And it took them 3 years. It took Russia 1.5 years, and they had their first mutiny in the war. But we did get to see the down at Bataysk. It was hit today, apparently by several attacks and explosions. Take a look at these clips. They show the proof.
Ну вот.
No,
Курсы проезжали.
the sky is green with toxic piss split. What would you like for...
kill you, makes you stronger. They said, I smell it very good. It doesn't kill me, so it must make me stronger.
Oh man, bro, that guy sounds like Mike Tyson. I was like, but man, yeah, like, bro, you know what they say in Russia, man? They sit there and said, "Oh, это тогда, man. Это хорошо." Man, honestly, man, I forgot my complete line of thought. You put out that joke and I laughed at it, and I completely forgot my lineup, man. I had a whole joke lined up. It was a pretty good one, and I lost it. But, anyways, you see it burning in the distance.
Слышь, что говорю? А сейчас сколько время? 12:40, по-моему, да? 12:34, в 12:20. 12 где-то 25 бабахнуло. Да, 12:20.
Is it dangerous outside, honey?
Honey, I don't want to go outside. It's scary. Don't let me go out there. Like it. This guy
Does
goes...
it mean we will lose our paycheck, блядь?
Man, it's really scary because for the first time ever, something lit up the sky over their city and they realized they're living in a toxic green cloud of smoke. I think that's the scarier part of this whole thing. But moving on from that, we also saw this clip as well.
Слышь, Лёп, его даже, да, это соседняя
Is
улица.
it the same guy?
Yeah, it's now pulsing now. He was filming it later, I guess.
Ну, сейчас четко видно, вот горит.
It's not turned into a pulse jet.
Сука,
It cannot turn into a pulse jet, it can!
Рядом с домом пидорасы вонючие.
Stop! Get through the bus, you damn liar! Anyways, we also got to see the fire from the distance. It didn't look green and toxic from here, but it was close to the middle of Bataysk, and we don't know what's on fire at the moment. We also got to see a little bit more of this as well, just make sure that we're covering all the bases. There's the explosion from another angle.
That's a bad one.
It looks like it's burning pretty heavily, whatever it is.
It's got a little bit of a flow behind it too, like a little rumble. I hear the cops showing up to it.
Stop resisting! Stop resisting! Put your hands in the air!
Он туда сейчас как въебали нахуй в новые Малиновки.
Dang, the police have got psychedelic sirens in this town. I mean, it's like the apocalypse or something. Like Siren Head out here.
Пиздос.
Bro, he just ends it with F, man. Man, he's hot dog, man. Aw, F. But anyways, moving on from that, we also get to see one last little bit of info on the hidden Bataysk. This is security camera footage from the nearby area. Looks like a drone strike to me. It was so loud, we didn't even really hear the explosion.
Also, by the way, this wouldn't be in the proximity of that of a port near Rostov-on-Don, would it?
And not really from what we know, because this happened down in Bataysk itself, apparently, down in this area, or at least around the city area right here. So apparently not, because the little port is actually up around here. So this is more so in Rostov-on-Don itself instead of Bataysk. Bataysk is on the other end of the swamp.
Okay, because I was wondering, some people were saying earlier, I saw some other analysts saying that could be a video showing the strike on that ship that was alleged to get hit in Rostov-on-Don, but I couldn't personally confirm it. Plausibly, it could have been over there near the port, but it looked closer than that.
I would say probably not, because that fire's coming from the middle of the city, and I don't think they're picking up boats and dragging them into the middle of downtown, to have them there to get hit. So.
Well, no, that last video you showed wasn't really in the middle of the city. Go back and take a look at it. It was like a little further off from what I could tell.
This one?
Yeah, let's see it.
Well, yeah, but there's an apartment building right there. There's no apartment buildings down near the port. Like the port's
Okay,
just
yeah, I see what you're saying now. I don't buy what they were saying.
Yeah, the port's just low-lying buildings. Like, see, it's like grain elevators, stuff like that. They have a very distinct profile. That building that was just silhouetted right there, that's clearly some form of an apartment building or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think it's a ship after all. I think that might be a building actually.
Bro, some people thinking that the Volga boatmen are grabbing the ships by ropes and pulling them across the whole damn swamp to get them in Bataisk. Hey, boy, yeah. Man, just yanking that thing into town. It's like, why in the world do the Ukrainians even think that a ship would be there anyways? But moving us on up into Rostov, speaking of that news, that Matthew just spoiled for all of y'all. Spoiler alert, there was a boat blown up in Rostov port. We don't know where, but it's an unknown ship at the moment, and the Russian authorities are informing that the ship was hit and is on fire at the moment. We don't know what type of vessel it is. We don't know how serious the damage is. These people are now saying that this clip's from Rostov-on-Don, but I'm once again doubting that, folks, because this is a parking lot in... There really isn't any parking lots in the area around here. There's one right here, but that's a mall, and a mall doesn't look like an apartment building, and all of these buildings beyond that are somewhat lower level, maybe the tallest being 4 stories, and that appears to be a 5 or 6 story building. So this appears to have happened in Bataisk. So that's what we're understanding at the moment. So it doesn't appear that we have any clips that we can confirm that came from the port of Rostov-on-Don of the explosion that happened on the boat, but we're going to try and get some more information on that as the days follow. Moving on out of that, though, it's time for us to move on up into Kyiv. And folks, it's time for us to end the long dry spell. It's time for a speech from the president of Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky. And without further ado, here's the speech. Peach!
Шановні українці, українки, коротко про цей день. Перш за все, доповіді з наших регіонів всюди, де необхідна робота по відновленню триває цілодобово. Це часто героїчна робота наших ремонтних бригад, наших енергетиків, залучених комунальних служб ДСНС України. І особливо в районах, які поруч з кордоном з Росією, поруч із лінією фронту. Всюди працюють, щоб відновити постачання електрики нашим людям, нашим громадам. Важливо, щоб не було в цьому прогалин, щоб місцеві та обласні влади не забували про жодну з вулиць, про жодне із сіл. Всюди робота має бути оперативною і відповідальність за це персональна. А зараз відзначу особливо наших рятувальників, наших працівників ДСНС, передусім на півдні України, там, де багато роботи після нещодавніх російських ударів. Одеська область, саме Юрій Афанасьєв, Руслан Бубок, Євген Бєльченко, Віталій Бурлак, Віталій Грицак, Сергій Лєпший, Олексій Маломан, Андрій Мандзюк, Сергій Морозов, Олександр Семенов. Дякую. Дякую вам, хлопці, та усім вашим колегам в Одесі і в області. Також ДСНС України на Миколаївщині. І це Олександр Бабій, це Владислав Вознюк, Дмитро Зарванський, Андрій Кравченко, Володимир Крицький. Дякую вам, вашим колегам. Кожен наш регіон, кожне наше місто, кожна громада мають розраховувати на повну ефективність екстрених служб, енергетичних компаній, кожної установи влади. Уряд України повинен допомагати максимально, і ресурси під це забезпечуємо, зокрема, нашою роботою з партнерами. Українська дипломатія має 2 пріоритети – працювати на оборону України і працювати на нашу стійкість. Власне, на цих 2 елементах ґрунтується захист незалежності та права українців жити, і це саме те, проти чого воює Росія. Сьогодні ми почули з Москви чергові сигнали, що наступний рік вони готують роком війни. І це сигнали не тільки для нас. Важливо, щоб партнери це бачили. І важливо, щоб вони не тільки бачили, а й реагували. Зокрема, партнери в Сполучених Штатах Америки, які часто кажуть, що Росія начебто хоче закінчити війну, але з Росії звучить зовсім інша риторика, інші сигнали. І як офіційні розпорядження їхній армії. Треба цей настрій Росії бачити і реагувати на нього. А коли у них саме такий настрій, то й дипломатію вони будуть підривати, намагаючись різними дипломатичними формулюваннями, тиском по тому чи іншому пункту в документах просто прикривати своє бажання знищити Україну, українців, бажання добитись легітимізації крадіжки Росією нашої землі. А далі інші країни в Європі, які хтось там в Росії може колись назвати своїми, начебто, історичними землями. Потрібен реальний захист від цієї російської історії божевілля, і зараз ми продовжимо роботу з усіма партнерами, щоб такий захист дійсно був. Потрібні безпекові рішення, потрібні фінансові рішення, зокрема по російських активах, потрібні політичні рішення. І потрібна сміливість усіх наших партнерів бачити правду, визнавати правду та діяти відповідно. Я хочу подякувати кожному, хто саме так підтримує Україну та роботу на досягнення безпеки. Завтра лідери Європи зустрічаються в Брюсселі. Це дуже важлива зустріч. Результат цих зустрічей, результат Європи має бути таким, що в Росії відчули, що їхнє бажання воювати ще й в наступному році не матиме сенсу, бо Україна матиме підтримку. Це на 100% залежить від Європи. Саме Європі робити цей вибір. Розраховуємо також, що наші представники на цьому тижні продовжать розмову і зустрічі з американською командою про кроки, які можуть спрацювати на мир та на гарантовану безпеку. Я дякую всім, хто з нами, хто з Україною. Я дякую всім, хто захищає нашу державу. Слава Україні!
Ram Slava.
Slava.
And with that, that is the end of the speech from the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, here on this day of the war, day 1393, which is actually the way we number these episodes, is off of the first day of the war in Ukraine. And with that, folks, it's time for us to move on to the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. But before we even move on to that, I gotta say that there's a lot of y'all as far as each and every single one of y'all goes. We have had a peak viewership tonight of 14.5 thousand people. I actually got up to 14.6 almost. And 100,000 people just about have watched this show in 2.5 hours. That's a lot of people, and we are greatly honored and massively appreciative to have had so many of y'all here with us again tonight as we cover all of the crazy news that's been happening around the world. I've got to say, a humongous thank yous to all of y'all. I was about to say thanksy from Banksy, but I was like, I'm not going to do that, so then I had to say thank yous. But a huge thanks to all of y'all for, of course, enjoying this news, and I hope that we've once again delivered it in the kind of style, format, and analysis that you all have all come to know and enjoy from our channel. With that in mind, it is time for us to move on into all of those questions, and we have quite many of them. Tonight, folks, we're going to be trying to actually do something a little revolutionary. We're going to try, if we can, to pace our super chats well enough that we can actually get to some live chats more than just 3, which is the bare minimum that we can get to usually when we run overtime. We're trying to get to a little bit more of them because, you know, usually we have so many super chats and so many rabbit holes that we go down, fun ones at that, though, that we do in the question segment that's really hard to get to live chats, but we are going to try and get to a good bit more than just 3 tonight. So with that, Matthew, what do we got? I also understand that we have one last bowl.
Yes, we do. We have one last poll right here, and it says Russian oil has now reached the lowest price since the start of the Ukraine war. And will this get worse? 47% said yes, but Russia won't survive it. While 36% said yes, but Russia will survive it. And 8% said no, it will stabilize very soon and the oil will be fine. So since Russia is basically a large, glorified gas station, I think that this low oil prices right here will hurt them. It will hurt them significantly. But the problem is, though, like I've been saying, they are getting propped up from external sources. So it's not going to destroy the Russian Federation. It will bring them to their knees, but it won't destroy them. So I'm with the 36%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'm with the 47%. I think it's actually going to be something that cannot survive. They can't survive the situation when the price of a barrel of oil was remaining stable. It's highly unlikely that they're going to be able to survive these plummeting prices that they're currently seeing, which will be greatly affecting their oil companies, which are already pretty much on death's doorstep at this point. So I hope that does address that well, in my opinion, because I have to be with a large majority. I think within a year and a half's time, it's going to become fairly obvious the Russians will not survive this extreme plummet in the prices of the barrels of oil that they're selling at the moment. So with that, it's time for us to move on into the questions. Matthew, what do we got?
Also, by the way, folks, in case y'all didn't hear, the U.S. military soldiers, like 1 million plus soldiers, will be getting what's called a warrior check. Or a warrior bonus or something like that. I don't remember the exact name for it, but they'll be getting a check in the amount of 1776, which is a very cute number right there. It's very cute, they tell me. But they're getting a nice little Christmas bonus. And I was just telling another viewer just a minute ago, who actually is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, that sounds to me like the steak and lobster routine, if you ask me. The government giving out that kind of money right before Christmas. That sounds to me like maybe that might be a big I'm sorry, like ahead of time for something coming soon. So who knows what that's about. Me personally, it sounds pretty wild. Also, I'm not really sure where they're getting the money to fund that, by the way, because I thought that had to be approved by Congress. So how's the president saying he's going to give $1,776 to each service member if that hasn't been approved? I'm not sure how that works because I thought the Congress held the power of the purse. But I guess maybe things have changed in the modern day. But Enforcer, what say you?
It's the warrior dividend. It's what it's
called.
The
dividend, like
they
own stocks or something. I forgot.
You own a stock in our war machine. Thank you. Man, honestly, I don't really know. I gotta say, folks, I've got to be honest with y'all. I have an extreme aversion to the word warrior. It makes us sound like we're a bunch of barbarian heathens with guys wearing fur pelts and killing people with spears in the military. That sounds like the word warrior just denotes. I'm just going to be entirely honest with y'all. The word warrior denotes complete stupidity to me. It's like roid rage in personate. That's not what our armed forces have ever been. Our armed forces are citizen soldiers. They're citizens that happen to be soldiers at the time, but they're still a citizen of the United States with an entire life and occupation ahead of them, usually outside of the military. That's how I like to look at it, and that's generally how our founding fathers looked at it, because our founding fathers didn't go, ooga booga, we got our warriors together from Stone Clan, and we're gonna go fight and beat the British clan on God. They didn't do that. This isn't Clash of Clans. We don't have warriors. We've got soldiers. We've got more so citizen soldiers, because there is no such thing as a warrior caste, and that's just stupid. And we're not savages. So that's what I'd have to say. I think the name's dumb. But also, that's a little bit interesting here. Nice to know that people are getting a bonus. But it does kind of sound, to be entirely honest, man, like a little surf and turf sort of a deal that's coming around a little early. So that might be what it's for.
It sounds a little bad, I'll be honest with you. It sounds like a little bit of a ominous thing, because usually when they give out stuff like that to the military, it's usually not just for, safekeeping. Like, here, just have a little money or something like that. It's usually a reason behind it. Some people think it's political. I see them in the chat saying that. But I have a feeling it might be a big, I'm sorry, here's some money. You're going to have to work over Christmas. Here's my apology ahead of time. It could be something like that. But also, by the way, another piece of news real quick before we get to our questions and things in just a second. It sounded to me like earlier today, Tucker Carlson apparently jumped into a little bit of a troublesome thing earlier. I think he was suggesting earlier, if I have this correct, I was trying to find the video here. Let's see here. Yeah, it sounds like he was alleging or suggesting earlier today that someone had told him that war was coming with Venezuela sometime tonight. So he fell into the trap. He fell into the trap of trying to predict when this thing was going to happen, except we never said that we heard it from anybody. We just predicted it and, speculated. I think he was trying to suggest that he'd heard it from somebody. So I think that's what had people up in arms tonight, thinking that a war was going to break out, is I think they heard that statement coming from him, and they thought, oh, that must mean it must be coming or something like that, because, everybody alleges, that Tucker's got something to do with, the intel agencies and stuff, so they think that maybe he knew something, but it turns out nothing happened tonight so far. It looks like the F-18 turned its transponder off. It's gone from Caracas, so looks like nothing's happening.
It's about 2:40 in the morning right now in Venezuela, so if nothing has happened yet, nothing's probably going to be happening because daybreak's coming really soon. So, yeah, nothing appears to have happened, actually, folks. We made it through the night, and nothing happened. So, that's interesting. I also see some people saying, let's see, I see some people saying, I like the word warrior, I don't like it. I'll tell you all why I don't like it. I'll give you all the whole reason why. I don't like the word warrior because, one, warrior is a social caste, usually in most societies that had warriors. Warriors are permanently fixed above the citizenry. in terms of importance. And that's usually how it went in most societies that ever had warriors, which, to be entirely honest with y'all, most of them didn't really have them. And that's also something that a lot of people don't know either. Knights are warriors. Let's see, what else would be warriors? Say the actual fighters of a prehistoric tribe would have been warriors. Say Native Americans had warriors in their tribes as well, which generally prehistoric in design and operation. But here in the Western world, we don't have that. We generally have soldiers, which are entirely different in their concept. Soldiers are citizens that happen to be fighting in a war. They're not a part of a social caste that is better than thou than the rest of the citizenry, because here in our country, we have the concept that every man's equal. And while that may not be realistic in actual practice, because we can clearly see that that's not really the case, by the founding principles of this country, everyone's supposed to be equal. The idea of calling soldiers warriors is almost putting it into the unsolidified concept that they are in a social caste higher than thou than the rest of the citizenry, which that doesn't really bode well with me, considering that the military in America, at least speaking originally historically, was never supposed to exist as a large standing force, basically as an existent caste of its own or a social structure. The US military has hardly ever existed through most of our history until the very lead up to World War II, when it built up in any size beyond about 20,000 members that were actively in the military at any given point. The militia was basically the fighting force of the country if we ever needed one. That's why if you look at the Civil War, you don't see the 131st Brigade and so on and so forth. You see the 6th of Minnesota, you see so on and so forth, because they were raised militias from those states that were then drilled and trained into a regular fighting force. That's something that I generally believe we should be trying to emphasize today, although we do have a large permanent standing army, that we do not have warriors that are a step above the rest. They are citizen soldiers that just happen to be serving in the military, and they are doing a great duty and service for the country, but that does not mean that they're a step above the rest of everyone else in the country. It's a great thing that they're doing, but that also doesn't mean that they're supposed to be considered better than thou, and the word warrior largely suggests that soldiers are kind of on a step above their own, and basically in a caste above everyone else, which is starting to stratify the country, which I don't really like the idea of. So I hope that explains that well, at least in my opinion. Maybe an abstract opinion, especially in the modern day. And I also don't like the whole allusions to folks being Vikings and stuff either. Like, you know, like I'll be honest with y'all, I don't really like the illusions of being a barbarian. Like, some people may like that, like the idea of drinking out of a horn and, like, you know, being salacious and slaughtering people. That might be appealing to some people, but the United States wasn't a nation of Vikings. It was a nation of civilized people founding a civilized nation with civilized values. And I generally like the idea of going along with terminology and wordage that will reflect a more civilized country instead of one that sounds like it's living within the depths of barbarism. But that's just me. Anyways, with that, we are on to the questions. What do we got, Matthew?
All right, so jumping to our super chats, this one goes to none other than Chef Danny B. And he throws in a generous $50 support. And thank you very much, Danny, for supporting the channel in a very big way with that $50 support. And it's good to see you once again. And Danny said, good evening, Forsters. Chef Danny here. And I was on flight radar earlier. And not only did I see a lot of U.S. aircraft, I also saw military aircraft from Norway. And is there any reason why they would be out there? And it was a helicopter, an LOT, LSA.
It may be that they have a vessel passing within the area, so they're just doing some forward reconnaissance with the helicopter to make sure that their vessel is going to be safe transiting the area. There actually is a lot of countries within the Eastern Caribbean, like the British Navy and others. So they do exist down there. There are other navies, so it generally may have just been a ship passing through, most likely. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, from what I would know. And with that, we're on to the next one. But a humongous thanks to you so much once again for the support, Chef Danny B, and being the official chef of the Lee Spring Army and helping this channel to keep on running. And so a humongous thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and jumping into our next one here, this one's going to go to KG, who puts in a 20 as well, and thank you very much, KG, for that support. He said, I smell a Gulf of Tonkin incident in the works in Venezuela.
Oh, this is probably going to be a real Gulf of Tonkin, though. This is going to be a real situation, because the only way that ships are going to fire on each other, or anyone's going to get fired on, is if a U.S. ship closes in on a sanctioned tanker to seize the vessel and also impound it, and the Venezuelans get in the way of that, and we're going to tell them to get out of the way or they're going to be fired on, and then they either have the choice of firing at us first, or trying to stand their ground and getting shot at, or backing off. So it's going to go one of those three ways, but 66% of the outcomes out of those three lead to some sort of a direct engagement between the two ships. So it's possible, it's highly likely that it will lead into a shooting battle. And this won't be no Gulf of Tonkin where they were firing at whales. They're going to be actually firing at real ships down there. So we'll have to see how this goes. But I can tell you that as far as that's going, like at least with the principle of what the Gulf of Tonkin is and what it turned into, I can promise you that it's going to get really close to that, or it is going to become that because of the situation that's now going to be forced into existing here soon because of the Venezuelan actions. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, I see a lot of people talking about the whole warrior thing still. Actually see that apparently it might be an unpopular opinion, but I mean, I'm still going to stick with my guns because I just, like, also, by the way, we actually have breaking news at the moment. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so real quick, folks, I'm getting some early reports here, and I want y'all to take this with a grain of salt to begin with. It appears to be likely true, but I'm getting some reports right now that apparently Estonia is claiming that 3 Russian border guards have illegally crossed into Estonian territory on the Narva River near the city of Veskanarva, apparently just an hour or two ago. So I'm hearing, and once again, take this for what you will. I'm waiting for more sources to back this up, but it sounds like the soldiers might have remained over there for about 20 minutes at least. And apparently, it's multiple Russian border guards that have, been said to have done this. So it's coming from a pretty trusted source. I trust the source that's giving the information, but I would like to see some other corroboration of it. But I'll be honest with you, if they did this, this will be a very big breach of the border agreement between Estonia and the Russians. Probably one of the first major ones we've seen since the war began, I would say.
And it is a fairly interesting one. We'll actually show you all the footage that we have. There's actually a camera that was on the Narva River on the Estonian side, apparently, that actually shows what appears to be some figures walking along the Estonian side of the bank of the Narva River, and these are alleged to be the border guards from the Russian Federation that illegally crossed the river and violated Estonian sovereignty. And they're just there are 3 of them. We can see 3 silhouettes there walking around. And if those are the border guards, they actually violated the border of Estonia today.
Little green men again, it seems like.
That's interesting. I would say the video evidence largely is corroborating the claim.
So what did they do? Like, what, swam across the river? Or, like, how did this work?
I'm guessing they came over on a boat. Like they just boated across and then hung out over there. Where in the world would that have been near Narva, say? Like, I don't really know.
So they're saying near the city of Vesnarva. That's what they're saying.
The city of Vesnarva.
Also, by the way, big shout out to Geo Insider for breaking the story, by the way. That's the source that we're looking at right now. We do trust Geo Insider as a source, by the way. Don't want to throw any shade or sound like we were throwing shade. We're not doing that. But very big story right here, if this is 100% confirmed as true.
Let's see, Vesnarva. Where in the world is Vesnarva? I'm having a hard time finding. Oh, here we are. Vesnarva, right here. So, let's see if we can find a bank that lines up with this. Could have been this one, or it could have been anything around the area of Vesnarva right here. Actually, it could have been up here on these islands, maybe. I don't know. The banks look very similar from satellite all over the place. Maybe. So it looks like there's possibly a wood behind them, so that might help us out. No, it doesn't, because there's a wood everywhere. So it could have been down here. It could have been up here. There are woods in these directions generally. Well, actually, no. Actually, no. It probably would have been somewhere around here, somewhere in the southern side, right here, because this forested wood is actually in an area where if a camera was looking backwards at this, they would actually be able to see the wood in the background. You wouldn't be able to see that elsewhere up here, so it's highly likely that this just happened south of the village of Vesnarva. So, interesting.
So, okay, folks, so I'm actually getting corroboration from the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, actually. It looks like they have confirmed this. So the story is corroborated that the Estonian police and border guard detected the illegal crossing, apparently by 3 border guards of the Russian Federation. So this is a confirmed breach of the border. This is not just speculation or like an unconfirmed story. This is confirmed. So Estonia appears to be responding by requesting and demanding a formal explanation of this from the Russian embassy in Estonia, and it just happened. So obviously the Russians haven't responded to this yet, and they probably actually won't, actually, because since this is confirmed to be a breach, there's really no good reason they would be crossing the border at all. So that's a hell of a situation there.
Yeah, that is one hell of a situation, honestly. I have not actually heard of border guards from Russia violating any other country's borders except for Ukraine. So this is news, actually. This is brand new, and quite a violation at that. So we'll be keeping an eye on the ongoing developments with that. But it appears that the Estonians are already downplaying it to be a small situation and not a major one. So that's a little unfortunate, but that's still a wild thing to hear happened. But with that, I hope you all enjoyed hearing that breaking news at that moment. And with that, folks, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to KG, who puts in a $20 support, and thank you very much, KG, as well, for that second support of the night.
Hey!
And they said F-18s don't fly solo and with transponders on, and when there is one, there is at least a wingman, if not an entire combat air patrol.
And I would have to say that I do thank you for the support and sharing that. And let me go reread that again really quickly because I was trying to understand it, and for some reason I was trying to also read the chat, and let's see, there were... Oh yeah, I would agree with you completely, KG. I was actually saying that earlier in the stream that there's probably another F-18 with it that has its transponder off, and they're only showing the singular one. So I definitely agree with that for sure. And I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you who help to make this thing possible and make this thing a reality. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. But getting back really quickly before we move on to the warrior-soldier argument, because some people are saying it should be warrior, it should be soldier. I like warrior, I like soldier. I just gotta say, folks, I hope I'm trying to make a good point here. The warrior denotes an unrefined sort of a deal, also a social caste sort of a deal. The United States wasn't founded on that. I never heard in any of George Washington's speeches, or any founding father speeches, or anyone's speeches from early American history in its first 100 years or 130 years. I didn't hear a single one of them say warrior. They always said soldiers of the nation, or sailors, or airmen, or, well, airmen was much later, but soldiers or sailors of the nation. They never said warriors. And generally, warrior denotes something that is more so akin to a caste system, and also less civilized. That's just I just don't like the concept of that. And also on top of that, it's become incredibly cringe these days with how it's used. Like it's the warrior spirit. It's like, yeah, I don't really get the whole deal with that, and then it's overblown, and then you got to add the Viking stuff to it. You got to, and then also on top of that, I got to say, folks, it's not really like it supports any moral decency. Like, to have the warrior ethos, it basically goes in line with having like a really long beard, trying to look like a Viking. Vikings haven't existed for 1,000 years. Getting a whole bunch of goofy tattoos, and then basically being a reveler. And I get that some people might like that, but generally, I don't like that being the idea of how the armed forces of our country is represented, because, it kind of makes us look like an easy target for people to go, look, they're basically barbarians in the United States, and we're certainly not barbarians. We're the most powerful and successful country on the planet, and you don't really do that being a gang of barbarians. So, just got to be honest with you, that's really why I don't like it. I'd rather like the idea of soldier. Soldier sounds a lot more refined. Doesn't really go with the whole, Viking subculture thing that's kind of going on with the whole warrior deal. And it also, on top of that, it seems a lot more professional to me. And whenever you look at any great general or leader in Europe, from the times of the early American periods, you never hear them go like Friedrich the Great. You never hear him go, "Follow me, warriors." He said to his men, "Come on, soldiers. Do you want to live forever?" And so on. Like you see Napoleon talk about his men as soldiers, not warriors. Like some of the greatest armies that ever existed in Europe, they never called themselves warriors. They called themselves soldiers. It was professional. It was refined. War was more so a science, not something that was emotionally charged and driven by some sort of a social caste higher than the normal citizen. And I generally like the concept of that more so than a warrior. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least from how I see it. But with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, so moving back into our super chats, this one goes to 7130N, who puts in a $20 super chat, and thank you very much for that super chat, by the way. We do appreciate that,
Hey!
and I believe that's one of their first ever super chats of the stream, and we do appreciate that very, very much. And they said munitions production is already approximately 60% native, and I predict within the next 3 years, Ukraine will increase native munition production to the point that the EU can supply the rest and snub the United States while risking losing intelligence.
I would have to say, honestly, it's probably going to happen. We already know that Europe is massively ramping up their arms production and have been for years, and that's now going at an even more accelerated pace now than it ever has been. And that would lead me to believe that they're probably going to be able to snub the United States in the future, but some countries already had that ability all at this point. Especially the French. The French rely on practically no U.S. weaponry for their armed forces, next to none. I think one of the few American weapon systems that they use is the Browning M2. Everything else they make in-house. So they basically already had the ability to go and kick the United States to the curb whenever they wanted. And that's also why you'll see that the French are more so of a loose cannon when it comes to foreign policy and making their own decisions, because they can. Like, there's no one that can ever say to France, well, we're not going to sell you this weapon or that weapon, because they don't buy any of our weapons, so they can do literally whatever they want with really no restraint. The only restraint that they would have is an economic relationship with the United States. But then again, that is something that's more so of an extreme, because that's damaging to both sides instead of just one. And arms sales from the United States to other countries, that can really only be damaging to that other country. If we tell them we're not going to give them parts or new equipment, that can be damaging for their national security. For the United States, it's just a potential loss of the sale. That we can probably find someone else to buy those weapons elsewhere. But for these countries, it would be a death knell. And that's why France is that largely sort of an independent country when it comes to their own decision making. But I have a feeling that a lot of other countries are going to be moving that way. Sadly enough, Britain is a country, well, not really sadly. Luckily enough and sadly enough, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Britain basically has really no defense industry or war industry of their own any longer. Base Systems is one of them, but they do not have a standalone, completely from the ground up organic war industry like other countries would, like Germany or France or the United States. And so for that reason, they rely heavily on either American-made weapon systems, license-built American weapons, or weapons that are made as a multinational venture by other countries, like the Eurofighter that was a multinational venture between the UK, Germany, and Italy. So that's a little bit unfortunate. I think the British might be reassessing their position there, so that way they can become more strategically independent. So they might either try and restart their own arms industry, which is highly unlikely, or they'll probably try and purchase weapons from the French or the Germans, which are more so aligned in their foreign policy analysis with them than they are with the United States. So I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And that's also why we've got to be very careful with our cards here. We're basically alienating one of our most important trading partners and one of our largest and most important allies on the planet. It's not really a good move, and we need to be a lot more careful with how we treat the Europeans and how we also respect them, because they generally treat us with a great deal of respect. We have to be reciprocal in that, otherwise it's going to end up with disastrous consequences. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one here is going to go to none other than Abdullah Siraj. And he put in a $15 support. And thank you very much, Abdullah, for that support. He said, why was Tom Artyom Alexandrovich allowed to return home? And I can't read the last words. I can't confirm that myself. But he was wondering, why was he allowed to return home?
Unfortunately, I don't really know a lot about the incident with that particular person, so I'd have to sadly declare ignorance. But Matthew, do you know anything about it?
I'll be honest, I don't know anything. I don't even know who that guy is, to be perfectly honest with you. I definitely don't know anything about the allegations, if there is any against him either. So I couldn't comment on the whole situation.
Yeah, I would have to say I don't really know a lot about the guy either. But I do thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a $10 super chat from Robert Krogan. And thank you very much, Robert, as well, for that support. He said, good evening, Enforcers and LLC, and I hope this helps a bit with the holidays coming around.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support during the holiday season. The holiday season. So loop-dee-doop and hoop-a-dee-dop. And I didn't do the other, because Randy was probably going to say something about it. But beyond that, I got to say a humongous thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make it through the holiday season. I gotta say, folks, that the holiday season is a wonderful time. Silver and gold, silver and gold. And I gotta say, huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Beaks Creations, who puts in a 10, and Damien McClay, who also put in a 10 as well. And a huge shout out to the both of you, Beaks and Damien, for also helping to keep the channel running with that support. But Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say, huge thanks to both of y'all. Y'all didn't throw in any words or any comments, but the support is greatly appreciative. And we thank y'all massively for helping this channel to keep on running, because y'all are helping us to keep warm during the holiday season. And it's a great time of the year. It's the most wonderful time of the year. We're not gonna break out into a musical for that one, but still, a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that to both of you incredibly well. And with that, we are gonna be moving on to the next one, but a huge thanks to both of y'all once again.
And our next one goes to Robert Krogan, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Robert, for that support. He said, doing hell of a job and keep up the good work.
Hey, and thank you for saying we're doing a hell of a job. We try our best. And I hope that tonight we've done a great job again. We were always hoping that our research and analysis is in depth and pretty well off. And I feel like we are generally reaching the mark these days, at least I'd hope. We don't really know. We have no clue, folks. The only feedback we get is comments and likes, and generally they're incredibly positive. So we're thinking we're doing pretty good, and I got to thank you so much for the support and saying that we're doing a damn good job. We're happy to know. And we got to thank you massively for helping this channel to keep rolling so we can keep trying to do an impressive job every single day. So humongous thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And I got to say, folks, we're going to address that. Well, actually, we're going to allow the poll to cook for a couple of more minutes. It's only been up for 2 minutes. But I got to say that the results are actually quite shocking, to be entirely honest, because the live chat was almost entirely against me, and the poll's going the complete other way. So with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to none other than our viewer all the way from the United Kingdom, the kingdom that is united in theory. And this one goes to Butchie777, who puts in a 20-pound donation. And thank you very much, Butchie, for that very heavy 20-pound support. That's a 20-pounder right there. That's like a big carp. But thank you very much for that support. And first, I'll tell you,
man, what a carp. Man, you're about to turn into Floyd the Barber. Oh, those carp, man.
Man, I did that impression so good. I made my own self start laughing. That's crazy. That's like narcissism.
Man, I gotta say, man, I gotta be honest with you. It was pretty good, though. I got a kick out of it. But I do thank you massively for the support. That is a lot of pounds right there, I gotta say. And we thank you massively for the support and helping this channel to keep running, Butchie777, because you are an old guard and a channel legend. And not only that, you are so dedicated to the bit, your profile picture is of a bobcat skid steer. And that is something that we are very proud of right there. And so a humongous thanks to you so much once again for the amazing support and helping this channel to keep running. Because it is folks like you that have made this channel possible and help us to keep this thing running. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Pixel Faker. And they're faking pixels, I guess. But they put in a 10. And thank you very much for that support. They said, does Russia blocking their own port mean that Ukraine can ship out their grain freely now?
Kinda not really, because while the Navy is blocked in port, they can still fire off anti-ship missiles and conduct anti-ship attacks from the air in the Black Sea, which is probably what they would do, and generally what we would probably know would end up happening, especially if they want to instill that blockade, but without the Navy being present at sea. So I hope that addresses that the best I can. And a big thanks to you once again for the support and helping this channel to keep running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it rolling. And so, folks, now that we've allowed the poll to have enough time to marinate, it's about 5 minutes now, and about 500 folks have voted on it. It's more so like 460. Matthew, what are the poll results?
All right, so this poll right here was suggested by Chef Danny B. And I said, let's run that poll, Danny. Let's see what the people have to say about this hot topic right here. And it looks like, well, first of all, the question says, as a military veteran or active duty, do you prefer to be called soldier or warrior? And also as a disclaimer up front, I didn't get into all the other terms like calling somebody a Marine, an airman, or anything like that. Yeah, we didn't get into all that. We just made it very simple: soldier or warrior. So 36% said soldier, the majority, while 8% said they want to be called a warrior, and 12% said I don't mind either one, and 45% abdicated their vote and said I'm not a veteran or active duty. So they're not, they're not saying anything about it. So most people in the military, active duty or veterans, appear to be want to call soldiers. Some don't care, and very few want to be called warriors. Also, by the way, I pulled up the definition of warrior, and it says, especially in former times, a brave or experienced soldier or fighter. So technically, it's not improper to call someone a warrior in the military today, but it's more of like a term of admiration than it is a proper title. But Enforcer, what say you?
But the thing though about how it's used today, like speaking of like the warrior ethos and stuff, it's basically like calling back to the Vikings, and it's not even the historically accurate Vikings. It's like Conan the Barbarian style Vikings, and like we have to have that warrior spirit. And honestly, I can't stand that sort of a portrayal of the military. The military used to be a science. Soldiering was a science. You don't hear like, and also on top of that, folks, another thing is that when you get down into the science of being in the military, especially in the army, it's the art of soldiering. It's not the art of warrioring. It's not that. It's the art of soldiering. Soldiering is a profession. It's not a way of life. It's not a caste system where you're like set as like I'm a knight in the realm. It's not like that. You're a soldier. It is your profession. Just like a baker has his profession, just like a tailor has his profession, and an armorer has his profession. A soldier is a profession, an honorable one at that. But I think that it should be looked at more as a scientific profession, although a barbaric one once war occurs. But at the same time, I like the idea of calling someone in a more civilized and professional term a soldier rather than a warrior. And I see some people saying,
I think I know why you're getting hung up on it, because the statements being made by the officials right now appear to be referring to Norse mythology, which is like, these like mythological warriors and stuff like that, like Odin, Thor, and these other ones here that are like from movies. And even like, like there's even like sayings like the dead warriors feasting in Valhalla and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Like
that
it gets into
cringe
this
shit.
like cringy territory. And also, I mean, you heard I think it was it the FBI director? He's the one who said something about I'll see you in Valhalla,
Yeah.
brother, or something like that. They're all like referring to Norse mythology. I'm not sure how they found like such a tightly wound group of people that believe in the same type of mythology like that. It's kind of wild that they all think the same.
It's so stupid, folks. I don't know why Vikings are looked at as like these really cool people. Like this is coming from someone, folks, who has Norse ancestry. Not a lot of it, but a little bit of it, enough to be able to talk on it. I just don't know why people idolize it. Modern Norse people are really cool. I would say from like hell, the 16th century on, they're very cool. But during the time of the Vikings, these people were the equivalent of Somali pirates back then. This is like making the Somali pirates into like this super cool mystical deal. Like, oh, the Somali pirates had, so and so, and he was this great pirate who took over the Maersk, Alabama, and he said, "I will see you all in paradise in the name of Allah." It's like it's that sort of a deal almost. It's like, would you ever idolize the Somali pirates? No. Why in the world do they idolize the Vikings? The Vikings were literally fleeing Norway because there was an ongoing famine there and people were starving to death, so they would set out to sea to find anywhere else to live rather than there because they didn't want to die. So they go around pillaging, murdering, and slaughtering men, women, and children and innocents wherever they could find to try and find a place for themselves. They did that a lot to the Britons. They did that a lot everywhere. That's really the only reason why a lot of royal families trace their lineage back to some form of a Norse or Viking heritage to some point, is because they were so desperate to go anywhere, they would go invading everywhere and usually have to end up being given pretty decent concessions to try and get them to stop.
Yeah. Like, what disturbs me? What disturbs me a little bit, and once again, it's not like a hard and fast link between the two. I'm also, by the way, I want to make this perfectly clear. If you're someone who's like into that like type stuff, like Norse mythology or something, it's something you're into. I think some of the Marvel movies also have that tied in, like they have Thor in the movie and stuff like that. That's a little bit different. But there was one group in history that was absolutely obsessed with Norse mythology and turned it into like an ethos around their whole like operations operations and things like that. And it was a really bad group of people who happened to reign over Germany during World War II. They were obsessed with that mythology to a very bad extent. And that's why I personally have a bad connotation with it, is because of that. And they really made a big deal about like portraying that through their symbolism, their imagery, and things like that. So it's not tainting the entire like mythology, but at the same time though, when you see people involved like with certain things, like having to do with defense, sort of obsessing over it, and it's not really professional in my opinion. It's like, why are we getting into mythology and we're trying to be professional? It seems a little bit strange to like be bringing that up all the time. So that's why I have a little bit of a problem with it, is the link.
And also on top of that, folks, I don't like the stupid, like, I'm just gonna be straight up here, folks. This isn't religious, but the whole cringe deal of like Valhalla is like, I'm not dying and going to Valhalla. If I was drafted in the military and I die, according to my faith, I'm going to be judged and sent to heaven or hell, one or the other, but not Valhalla. I don't believe in Odin. I don't believe in any of those stupid people. Like if you like them, that's fine. I don't like them at all. I think it's goofy, it's stupid, and on top of that, the whole deal basically is about acting like a drunken reveler. Basically, when you get down to the basics of what it kind of gets down to, it's like, let's get tattoos and be a frat bro and not really treat our job like a profession, but more like a frat. And it's like, I don't like that at all. It's like, we're like, the military is a professional gig for a professional job, which is the defense of our nation. That's how it was founded in the era of the Enlightenment, which is when our nation came into being, and that's how it should be looked at these days. I don't like the whole goofy deal about Valhalla and crap. It's like, you know, if you want to grow some stupid-looking beard and run around with a battle axe and look like a clown, that's on you. But if I'm getting in the military, or if I'm thinking of the military of this nation, I'd rather think of them like all of the soldiers that we've had throughout our history. Those guys would dress up in the uniform of this country and carry our banner onto the battlefield and would fight and would die and would kill endless amounts of people to see that our nation triumphed on the field. That's what I think of. I think of all those people at the Battle of Gettysburg, at the beaches of Normandy. None of them talked about this warrior spirit and none of that stupid crap. They were citizens that were soldiers that fought and died for this nation as citizens that were fighting for the nation, not as warriors, not as some like goofy Viking deal. I don't like that. Like, I just don't like it at all. It's really taking the whole legacy of what our nation is and basically spitting on it and then saying we're going to pretend like we're Vikings now. You know, that's what I just don't like. That. Huh? Come in. Like, man, we ain't gonna do the rest of it. But beyond that, it appears that most people agree with me. Like, I'm sorry, folks. I feel very strongly on that sort of a deal, and I like looking at our soldiers as more so professionals, rather than like a divine by right warrior of the Viking past of Valhalla and stuff. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Mike Barnes, who puts in a $50 support. And thank you very much, Mike, for that very generous support right there. And he threw that in just a second ago, and we do appreciate that, Mike. He said, I'm a veteran, still a soldier, not a hero. It was my job. Now, me personally, Mike, I will say this. I've not served in the military. My family served in the military. I personally have not. But me personally, I do have a respect, more so than just the normal respect for people, for the soldiers, especially the ones that go into combat, because that is something there, like, even if it is your job, like, it's still a risk that you're having to take on, more so than the other soldiers. So I have a big respect for combat veterans, especially the ones who fought in legitimate wars, and even the ones that fought in, like, the Middle East and, you know, during the times we were over there as well. So I have big respect for it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I have huge respect for the armed forces and the soldiery, the Marines, the seamen, the airmen, and so on. But that's one of the things that makes me kind of get a little bit heated about this, is because everybody I ever knew that was in the military never called themselves a warrior. They never acted like a reveler. They were always great people. Like, most every single one of them I knew. To be honest with y'all, I'll just be straight up. The ones that really, like, the few that I've ever run into that lean into that whole warrior deal of, I'm a warrior, ooh, ah, ah, they generally were, like, kind of sketch, to be entirely honest, and they kind of used that as their excuse. A warrior does whatever the F he wants, crushes skulls, there's no morality here. And I'm like, that's not really the way that this is supposed to be. And that's also why I don't like it either, because in my personal experience, running into folks like that, the people who looked at it as, I was a soldier, I was involved in the business of soldiery, I did my job for my nation, and I'm proud of it. I respect them greatly because they have a great set of beliefs and morals and values from what I have experienced personally growing up. The folks who said that they were warriors, they could stab you in the back and they wouldn't think twice about it because they act like it's a damn Viking age. Like they'll stab you in the back and get all the maidens or something. It's like we're living in the 21st century, man. This isn't how the world works. Like I don't even know where in the world this moral compass comes from or the lack of one. But that's how I generally look at it. But I do thank you massively for the support and helping this channel to keep running. I see some people saying you were never in the military, but you're talking about the military. I don't know if you've ever noticed what we do on this channel, but yeah, that's what we do. That's the whole show, basically. And also on top of that, the president never served in the military, nor did the last one, and they've been talking about it just fine during their terms. So I don't know why in the world you completely agree with everything that either the last guy or the current guy is saying, and they never served, and they say a lot about the military, but then when we say something about it, there's a problem. Like, and also just...
Yeah, also, do people not realize there's things called civilian military analysts? Like, you don't have to have served in the military to analyze war. Like, for example, the government even hires people. Now, I will say there's a preference toward hiring former military intel officers. There's a preference toward that. But there's also civilian intel officers as well that work for, like, for example, the intel agencies like the CIA, the NSA, and things like that. And they haven't served a lick in the military. And they're also, doing the same thing we're doing. We're analyzing the war.
Yeah, I mean, not that we're in the military or, working with them, but still that's how I look at it. Like that's how I would look at it, and that's also on top of that. And one more thing I have to say, folks. One more thing I have to say. If we couldn't talk, I would say that I would concede the point that I can't talk about anything in this country if I wasn't paying taxes. But I pay about 35 to like 40% because we're self-employed of our income every year in taxes. So the fact that we're paying that much in taxes and we're pretty much paying the salaries of these service members and we're pretty much paying for the institution to exist, I generally say that gives us a pretty good point to be able to talk about it however we would want or any topic in this country because we're basically, like everyone else, paying for the institutions to exist and operate. So why the hell shouldn't we have a stake in what's said about it? We pay for it. But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Chef Danny B once again. And thank you very much, Chef Danny, for that $20 support once again. And he said, Chef Danny again. I don't know if I ever told y'all, but my grandpa joined the World War II in his brother's name because he wasn't old enough to join and then got honorably discharged and joined the Navy in his own name. And that was really popular, like for people to be doing that back in the day. Like people back in the day, they weren't like second guessing, like joining the war, like to go into it. You had people that were like underage trying to go into the military and lying about their age to get in there. I mean, you had people from all types of walks of life, literally raring to go, like to go fight for the country. Unfortunately, not trying to be morbid here, but I'm not sure if we would see that today, unfortunately. People should still be willing to fight for the country. Certainly got its problems today, more so, than in my opinion in the past. It's got some extra big problems today, but I would still say hopefully people would sign up like that. But I'm just not sure if they would. I think people are starting to get brainwashed with propaganda and starting to get anti-American, even though they live in America. But Enforcer, what say you?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Enforcer Matt on that. There's a lot of, I'll be honest with y'all folks, even with how things are going in the last administration and now, if the last president or the current president ever sent us a letter in the mail, because technically the draft notices are a letter from the president, and they say that we require you to serve the country, I would immediately report in. Having no military experience, knowing what's coming, knowing what war looks like, I would report in. It's the duty of a citizen within his own country to serve the nation if they're called upon to serve, no matter whether they want to or not. It's our nation. It wouldn't exist with us. It wouldn't exist without us. We have to fight for what we have, everything that we hold dear, and all of the people that are in this country that are great and amazing folks. There's always bad eggs. Bad eggs are no reason to go and cast aside the entire nation. There's a lot of great people in this country that are worth fighting for. And I would go and immediately report for military service that there was a draft and I was drafted. They might not take me because my spine's messed up, but I would still go to MEPS nonetheless. Because why in the hell would no one do that? Why in the world would someone not anyways? Like you're gonna let everyone else go over there and fight and die for you and not being involved in that? Like honestly, I wouldn't be able to live with the knowledge of that. Even if I ended up going over there and getting maimed, I wouldn't be able to live with the knowledge knowing otherwise I would have stayed home a coward and not fought with everyone else in the country.
Yeah, but their argument here's the argument that you hear a lot of people saying these days, and I will say there is some truth to it. Fair enough, there is some truth. People will say, "Well, you know, America doesn't fight for America anymore. It fights for like oligarchy interests. It fights for oil and fights for resources, and I don't want any part in that blood money war." That's what people say. And I mean, it's fair enough. I even heard service members say that, by the way. Like for example, when I was looking into joining the Air Force, because that's something I previously did, is I was actually thinking about joining the Air Force straight out of high school, but decided to go to law school instead. The recruiter himself was even saying that himself. He was saying he was very disillusioned with the fact that the United States was not fighting for its survival. It was fighting for things like fighting for oil and resources, and he wasn't too happy about that. So that's the argument that you hear people making. But I wonder if we were actually fighting for the survival of the nation, like let's say a World War III scenario where it's life or death. We either win the war or the entire West gets demolished, destroyed, and our entire way of life is gone. I wonder if people would change their mind then, or would the propaganda still take hold and make people not want to serve?
I'll be honest with you though, man. Like it's like people say that. And it's like I don't know if they're getting the bigger picture here. It's like if we don't fight for that oil, someone else is getting it, and we're getting screwed. You know, people like I don't get that argument because like one of the biggest things that people bitch about in this country is the price of gas, which is directly correlated to our control of the oil globally. So they sit there and bitch about, oh, we're fighting for the gas and the oil. And then at the same time, when we don't fight for it and the prices go up, then they bitch and moan that the prices go up. It's like either we're going over there and we're fighting and dying to keep the prices low, or the prices are going to go up and everyone's got to stop complaining. It's one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, I do understand where people are coming from, though. I'm not going to say it's totally, out there. I mean, the U.S. has, like, for example, fought wars for resources and also for, I guess, political interests. That has been a thing, but that's just part of being a superpower. Like every superpower in the world is going to power project. That's something they all do. So it may seem ugly to some people, and some people may not find it a cause worthy enough to go fight and risk their life over. But at the same time, when you join the military in peacetime, then you got to understand it's part of it. If you don't want to do that, then don't enlist and just simply wait for a survival situation to pop up, like for example World War III, and then go enlist then. But I don't. One thing I will say, I don't understand the people that know what they're getting into and then sign up and then start bitching after they signed up. It's like, well, you knew that before you went into it, or you should have. So I don't understand that, but I do understand the base argument though. Like, I understand that, in a general perspective.
But I mean, they say that though, and then I guess they just completely forget that the rest of American history was wars for resources. Like every war that we had that led to the westward expansion of our country, every single one of those wars was a war of expansion for land. That was the resource we were shooting for. And it wasn't just for every Tom, Dick, and Harry to have a couple of acres. It was to go and have a whole bunch of wealthy prospectors go out there and buy up most of the land and then open up cattle ranches and make a killing, was what that was generally for back in the day. Then we also had endless wars in the Caribbean. Well, hell, let's not even get to that. We had endless wars after the Civil War where we would beat people's ass to take some land from them or get some resources generally under our sphere, like the sugar in Cuba or the tobacco industry in Cuba, or better yet, the Philippines themselves as an outpost for the United States in the Pacific. Or then later on, we went into Central America and we fought endless wars through the 1900s to the 1920s, just so that way we could ship in bananas cheaply into the United States. Like, this is nothing new. Like, people act like this is something new. We've been doing this forever. And if we hadn't been doing it forever, you wouldn't be seeing that people would have ever talked about a good life in America, because no one would have ever fought and died for a couple of tons of bananas to be shipped into the United States to where they could be sold at 5 cents a bushel.
Yeah, I would say so. Also, I saw 7130 said you're oversimplifying 40 plus years of American history. Trying to claim consenting to be drafted means you're either willing to fight in a war for low oil prices or not. But the catch is, though, we're not drafting people to go fight for oil, though. That's the thing, 7130. During a draft, that's usually during situations like, for example, World War II, things like that. That's usually situations where people start getting drafted. To my knowledge, I don't think we've had a draft over oil in the Middle East, to my knowledge, have we?
Say what?
We haven't had a draft in the Middle East like to go fight for oil resources.
Oh, no,
have we?
absolutely not. No, we've only had volunteer only.
The last time we had a draft was Vietnam. So, I mean, Vietnam was fighting over, I believe it was a spread of communism, I believe was the real reason we were fighting that war. So, do I have that correct, by the way?
Yeah, it was containment.
Okay, yeah, it was contained. I was just making sure because I don't have the whole. I'll be honest with you, the Vietnam era of history is very unappealing to me. Like I really hate studying that period. There's something about it. I think it was just. I just don't like. I won't get into the politics of it, but I just don't like that whole like history era right there with Vietnam. But yeah, that was the last time we had a draft was containing the communist spread in Vietnam. So that still wasn't technically over resources. I'm sure someone's about to come in here and say, well, actually, there was this other reason we did it, and it may have been, but technically it was a spread of communism. So now, to my knowledge, though, 70-30, we have not had a draft over resources.
No, we've never had a draft over resource wars ever. That's basically volunteer only. Very few times have we ever had drafts in this country. We had a draft during the Mexican-American War, the U.S. Civil War. We had a draft during the Spanish-American War. We then had a draft in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. But that was largely an overlapping draft that lasted for decades and never ended, and it just carried on over into Vietnam. But since then, we have not had a draft, and during every other period that I just mentioned, we generally didn't have a draft then either. Also, by the way, I did forget to mention, we did have a draft during the War of 1812, but that was a fairly smaller one, so it didn't really count too much. But beyond that, those are really the only times we've ever had a draft in this country, and usually it's a moment of imperative necessity for national defense. The only ones that really didn't fall into that is Korea and Vietnam, but that was more so on communist containment. Which, just saying it this way, we're talking these days, folks, about we've got to stop the Russians marching further into Europe, so we've got to be ready for war and we got to be ready to fight the Russians. Isn't that the same thing as saying we shouldn't let the Soviets and the Chinese turn Vietnam into a communist state, and we need to stop that right there and stop the Vietnamese people from being subjugated by an enemy government of an enemy sphere? That's basically the same thing. Like as far as I've talked to Vietnam veterans, I've talked to about 5. And out of all those 5, there was only one of them that said that the whole thing was completely pointless. The other 4 said that if we had stayed on the ground and we had kept fighting, we would have won, and that we should have stayed there. And it was a terrible tragedy that we left. And one of those was a great friend of mine. Unfortunately, passed away from Parkinson's a long time ago. But he had the belief that if we had stayed there, we would have been able to eventually win that war, and we would have been able to contain communism to just northern Vietnam, and the whole of Vietnam wouldn't have fallen. And he talked about all the nitty gritty. I won't get into all the details that he talked about. A lot of it's probably too gruesome for YouTube, but he still stated that there was a point.
Me personally, I don't think there was a point to Vietnam. I view Vietnam as the same situation as Venezuela. It's sort of the same thing. It's a war you can fight. Like there's a justification to go fight it. Like for example, in Vietnam, it was containing communism. There's also a justification for Venezuela as well, technically containing the Chinese influence there. But should you fight it? That's a whole other question. There may be a justification, but just because there's wars that are justified to fight doesn't mean you actually go start it and start fighting it. Unless it's just like absolutely necessary.
Well, yeah, but I mean, then we could just back off of Ukraine and let whatever happens happen.
Well, that's necessary though. I mean, we can't let Ukraine fall, because if Ukraine falls, there will be no buffer between the NATO states and Russia. And we know through intelligence that Russia wants to take more than that. So we have to stop that because we have credible intelligence saying that Putin will move beyond Ukraine. I mean, if Vietnam ended up falling anyway, I mean, they're communists today. I mean, they actually fell.
Yeah, because we abandoned them.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it stopped with that. I mean, it's Vietnam and that's it.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing, though. Like, Vietnam was the buffer to Southeast Asia. If Vietnam fell, then the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia and Thailand could fall. That was the concern. It was basically the Ukraine of its day. So we got involved there.
But did they?
No, because we started a thaw with the Chinese, who generally started to, well, that whole thing is incredibly complicated with Vietnam and Chinese and Soviet relations, but generally we started to thaw relations with the Chinese, and considering that the Vietnamese were almost completely detached from any pro-communist force nearby, which the only one that was pro-Vietnamese at that point was the Soviets, not the Chinese, because the Chinese then got involved with a war with Vietnam in 1979 to 1982. The Soviets weren't able to use that as a jumping pad to further expand. But at the same time, they easily could have. I mean, they easily could have done that if we didn't fight in the Korean War, because we could say the same thing about Korea. Korea was a totally pointless war, nothing of value there. We ought to have just left the South Koreans to get steamrolled, and, it wouldn't have expanded from there. Certainly wouldn't have gone to Japan. But we fought and lost a lot of men in South Korea to turn South Korea into what it is today. And I'm sure if you asked a lot of people these days, what is it worth it to fight for South Korea to exist? I'm sure a lot of people would say, yeah, especially compared to the derelict North.
Yeah. Well, me personally, I think here's where I disagree. If I was in charge of foreign policy, my general modus operandi would be to support allies defend themselves against the enemy by arming them heavily with weapons on a consistent basis, and also giving them proper diplomatic support and financial support to keep their economies functioning throughout the war. Like, for example, every wartime economy has struggles. Even Ukraine has it. Russia's definitely having it, and also because they're getting attacked daily with their oil refineries. But I'm not a big fan of sending U.S. troops to go fight wars and start wars for containment. I'm not a huge fan of that. There's ways to deal with it without putting American troops at risk. I'm only a fan of putting, well, not a fan of it, but I'm only in support of putting American troops at risk, because that's a huge step to take if our survival absolutely depends on it. And I'd like, for example, in Venezuela, I just don't see that there right now either. So why would we start a war, put troops in a place where it's not absolutely necessary to fight it?
Well, I mean, like, for example, if it becomes clear the Russians are going to start a larger war with NATO, why wouldn't we go into Ukraine, considering we're already at war with the Russians, and fight on Ukraine's side? You could start to sell off every place in the world wholesale by saying that war doesn't have a point, it's more so abstract, because all of it's abstract, but these abstract ideals have a direct impact on how our nation performs in the world and how we live here at home.
So you're in favor of sending U.S. troops to go fight Ukraine in Ukraine right now?
No, like, if it becomes a necessity, yeah. It's not a necessity right now, but if it became a necessity because the Russians have made it openly clear they're not stopping at Ukraine, so we're either fighting in Warsaw or we're fighting in Kyiv. That's really the only options we have right now with how the Russians have outlined their foreign policy. So I'd rather fight it closer to Moscow than closer to, say, Washington or London or Berlin or some other major capital here within the West. That's how I'd look at it if push came to shove.
But you would agree, though, that right now we have enough intelligence to make the determination that Vladimir Putin wants to move beyond Ukraine. He's getting held up there because Ukraine's still being supported by Europe and the United States. So he's not able to move on beyond Ukraine yet. But if he's able to take Ukraine, he will move on to other European states. So, I mean, under that premise right there, like you said a minute ago, if you'd rather fight Putin early, if you know he's going to be moving on to the European states. So, I mean, why wouldn't you just go ahead and put U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine right now and fight Putin?
Because the Ukrainians have a chance of winning without us having to be there right now. If the Ukrainians didn't have a chance of winning without us being there, then we get involved. And I think what you're missing here is the exact details of how the Korean War and the Vietnam War went. South Korea almost lost. Like they like let me go pull up Korean War map 1950 to show you what was left of South Korea when we got involved. So this was, let me see if I can get a good map. Here we go. This is a pretty good one. So hopefully you can see this. This little area in blue down there was all that was left when we got involved. They were losing. Like, they had completely lost, basically. They were about to completely capitulate because there was nothing left. The entire country had been taken over by the North Koreans. So when we got involved, it was a last-ditch effort. There was no way we could give them enough guns or enough weapons to turn the situation around where we could stay uninvolved. It was a situation where we had to get involved, or South Korea was going to be lost completely in less than a few months. So then we got involved, and we started to create defensive perimeters and started to assist the South Koreans around the Pusan perimeter, or the Busan perimeter as it's now called these days. And then later on, we conducted an entirely U.S.-based naval landing at Incheon, which is to the west of Seoul. After we did that, the North Korean lines down in the south, they completely collapsed, and the North Koreans started to flood north, and that's when we pushed them all the way up to the Yalu River, and then that's when the Chinese got involved, and the war then turned into a stalemate for the next few years. But we got involved in Korea not because we just wanted to, it was the last course of action. When we got involved in Vietnam, it was generally a last course of action because the dictators that were in charge of South Vietnam, especially the one at the time when the U.S. started to get heavily involved and got into the Battle of Ai Dring in 1965, they were actually saying that the situation in South Vietnam was incredibly strenuous and that the war could be lost without any larger involvement. That's why we kind of created the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and then we got directly involved in search and destroy missions like the Battle of Ai Dring from 1965 on to about 1972, was because generally from what we knew, there was no other option rather than to get involved and to try and assist the South Vietnamese. Otherwise, they were going to fall. With the situation in Ukraine,
you're saying So you're saying basically, I think I'm understanding what you're saying now. You're saying that if Ukraine looks like, for example, let's say the Russians, like, let's say in the next month, which this would never happen, but hypothetically speaking, if the Russians started plowing their way through the front lines and all of a sudden all of Ukraine's frontline forces and defenses started collapsing and the Russians made exponential progress and started basically surrounding Kyiv, at that point, you would advocate sending U.S. troops into Ukraine to change the situation.
Yes, if they cross the Dnieper River or the Dnipro River, whichever way you want to say it, if they cross that river, we have to get involved. At that point, it's going to be a losing battle, especially if they've made that much ground in a short amount of time. At that point, there's no other option. Our only options then are Putin and us. We're either going to be fighting in the streets of Warsaw or we're fighting in Kyiv a couple of hundred miles closer to Moscow. And at that point, if we're taking an analysis of the situation, it's a lot better to be fighting closer to Moscow than it is closer to any of us over here.
Interesting. I'll be honest, I'm a little on the fence about that because while it sounds good in practice, at the same time, though, it's interesting because I can understand what you're saying. It'd be better to fight the war or start fighting the war in Ukraine since that territory is already torn up by war for years. It'd be better to start there. But at the same time, though, NATO might have some more time, or at least be able to buy itself some more time to keep building up its forces because Russia couldn't probably immediately launch a war on a European state. Like once they took Ukraine, they couldn't immediately launch it. They would still have to have like 6 months to a year at least to properly rebuild their forces to be able to launch that invasion into a NATO state. So if you didn't start deploying troops into Ukraine as Russia was starting to finish their taking of the territory, then you could have an extra year to build up more ammunition, more equipment to be able to fight Putin when he does launch that invasion into a Baltic state.
I mean, like you could look at it that way, but honestly, the truth is that if a war starts, everyone gets ready. Well, everyone starts to get ready largely overnight. They don't even really have to be ready now. They just have to be ready to punch the Russians on the field in the first 3 months, which all of them can do. And then by then, the war industry is kicking in heavily at that point. It's very easy to produce most simple ammunitions, and in a war like that, it's all about mass production. It's not about fine produced equipment or fine tuned equipment. And it would be a lot better, at least as far as the territory goes, instead of having a good bit of shells to start off with, kind of like a good appetizer, and the Russians are already marching into the Suwalki Gap and besieging the Baltics, it's a lot better to throw them off kilter at that point and slam them in Kyiv and start besieging Kaliningrad than to see that they take the advantage and generally the surprise, and then have the attackers' advantage against us because they're able to go at their own pace instead of us deciding the tempo at that point.
Yeah, we'll have to find out. I think fortunately though we won't have to find out on that hypothetical because as long as Europe specifically keeps supporting Ukraine and they liquidate that $200 billion in assets and use that to fund the war for several more years, I think Ukraine will hold their territory. So we probably won't have to ever reach that hypothetical as long as the West keeps support going.
Yeah, I would agree. But at the same time, folks, like I gotta say, like I'm an American, I'm not a European, and I don't live in a European country. But considering that Europe is such a major economic partner of the United States, primarily, not talking about Ukraine, but the European Union and the UK, I would rather fight that war on Ukraine soil than I would in Europe itself. That's not going to affect y'all heavily, that's going to affect us over here. So it's better to try and keep that as contained as possible outside of our territory than it is to have the battlefields happen on our own home turf. And knowing that the Russians are saying they're going to take back everything that was historically Russian, which is much more than Ukraine itself, it's basically the entirety of the eastern part of NATO, that pretty much guarantees us that a war with Russia is going to start at some point in the future. So it's not a matter of if we can avoid it, it's a matter of when it's going to start. And if it's going to start, I would much rather have that happen on our timetable than on theirs. Because if it happens on their timetable and we're kind of just biding our time and trying to wait for them, that could end up being a lot more of a difficult war to fight. We will win either way, or we're going to end the entirety of civilized society in a couple of months. It's going to go one way or the other. But if we're looking at a situation like that, I'd much rather have it start at our pace than theirs. Because if we get the jump on them, especially an attacker's advantage, and we gain air supremacy, well, not air supremacy, but at least air superiority at the outset near to an active battlefield, we have pretty much already won that war. We just have to maintain air supremacy and destroy them from the skies and then we can slowly start rolling into whatever's left, or try and see about negotiating a ceasefire at that point, showing the Russians that they're clearly outmatched and there's no way to win, and they'll only be facing utter destruction if they continue by nuclear arms, because they will obviously go to that route, and that will end in their own destruction. So that would generally be my foreign policy approach if things went from bad to worse. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And actually, looks like Matthew has pulled up a poll on this, so we'll see how that thing marinates here. But actually, we're going overtime, folks, and we're supposed to get a lot of live chats, and I think we're still in the super chats. So with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Psyops, who puts in a $10 super chat. And thank you very much, Psyops, for that support as well. And he puts in a nasty joke that we can't repeat. But thank you very much, Psyops, for that joke and that super chat, and we do appreciate it. And we also have a $5 support from Matej, who said, just wait until they realize that sea babies can jump over that just like the dolphins.
Oh, wait until they can. They probably will make one like that, or we've just given the Ukrainians an idea. Either way, they ought to try and make one of those, because it will be hilarious to watch one of those leap over a caisson and get right into that port. So big thanks to you so much once again for support. I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Rye Guy SR, who puts in a 5, and he said, LTLSA, take one from the chat, and Russia will loose.
And I agree. And a huge thanks to you so much once again for support. And long live the Lee Spring Army. And the Lee Spring Army will never truly die. So a huge thanks to you once again. And we're on to the next one.
And that live chat question goes to Belges, who said, Matt, how much does Russia need per barrel of oil to break even? And they need about $70 a barrel. That's what they budgeted for in their 2026 budget. They need to make at least $70 a barrel of their oil exports. If they're not making that, which they're not, they're making $40 a barrel right now, then they're running a massive deficit. And it's the largest deficit they've ever had right now. So, Enforcer, what say you?
They're running a $30 loss per barrel at the moment, so that's about the amount that they would have to make, and they're certainly not making anywhere close to that. They would actually have to be selling oil at the the actual 2024 average just about, to be able to try and break even, which they're nowhere close to doing. So with that, I hope that does address that the best we can. A huge thanks to you once again for support, and we're on to the next one.
And we also have a $5 support from Dago, who puts in a 5. He said, can the USA take the Panama Canal back? And will Venezuela civil war? And will USA invade and take out Maduro? And who's backing Maduro now? And Slav LSA. Check my music, LSA.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support. And generally, the Venezuelans are backed by the Russians and the Chinese, but more importantly, the Chinese at this point. They're the ones financially investing. Technically, we can retake the Panama Canal, but I'll be entirely honest, after we kind of strong-armed the Panamanian government earlier this year, I don't really think we need to. They pretty much completely shed off any Chinese connections that they had economically in every way. So the Panama Canal is secured for us, and our treaty is still existent with them. If the government ever appear, I would say, though, that we need to certainly have intelligence officers within Panama to gather intelligence on the internal dealings of the Panamanian government and see exactly where their loyalties lie, and to keep a constant read on that. Because if it ever looks like the Panamanian government is attempting to backstab us or betray us by shutting out military access to the Panama Canal or general U.S. access to the canal, then we'll have to take swift military action to secure the canal and also ensure that it does not take any damage in the process. But for now, I don't think it would be a priority for us to take this, but it is something that we should keep an eye on, at least from the intelligence side, and keep a constant read and a heartbeat on what the Venezuelan, well, not the Venezuelan, but the Panamanian government is doing. But a huge thanks to you for the support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And this one goes to Tetsubanchi, who puts in a 5 and said, not a shot will be fired in Venezuela, and it would hurt the current leadership's political ambitions, and nothing will happen, and that is the plan. There is a plan, but it's not warfare.
Maybe. I mean, that's possible, but I'll be entirely honest with you. I think that whole deal, I think that whole boat's kind of sailed. Not getting into the details on that too much as to why I'm saying that, but I think the whole boat sailed. And also on top of that, it doesn't really appear that any other actions are being affected in foreign policy or not by the popularity of those decisions at home, because it's quite clear by polling that nobody's a big fan of abandoning Ukraine and becoming isolationist. yet the U.S. administration is still largely trying to move along with that mindset. Even the Congress went against that. I mean, like, when the whole country's against you, the whole country's against you. The Congress is going against it. Most of the public isn't for it, and this guy's still going for it. So I think the whole popularity thing with how he's been managing stuff, especially in foreign policy, which is the only part we're going to speak on, has not gone well at all, even in just a year. So if they did go to war with Venezuela, it would just be another thing that is once again being measured out somewhat poorly in terms of long-term thinking of popularity by the current administration and foreign policy decisions. Not to say the last one was any popular at all either. I mean, they were quite abysmal as well, but this administration isn't really changing much anything. If anything, it's getting worse somehow. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. A big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
Also, by the way, real quick, the poll question says, this is on the topic we were just debating a minute ago, if Russia started overwhelming Ukrainian forces, would you deploy NATO troops to fight in Ukraine or wait until later? 73% said deploy NATO troops to fight in Ukraine, and only 27% said wait and build up for Russia's new invasion. Now, if you're asking me critically what I would think, I would personally say, me personally, I strongly believe that Putin will move on beyond Ukraine. So you're going to be fighting him one way or the other. So it's basically picking your battlefield. Do you want to fight the battle in a Baltic state, or do you want to fight the battle inside of Ukraine? Ukraine, not trying to be morbid, but Ukraine's already torn up to hell from the war. So the destruction's already ravaging Ukraine, so it would be probably better to fight it there instead of terrible Baltic state and get into a war and start fighting a ground battle in Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania. So I'm actually with the 73%. I would actually agree with the Enforcer on that one. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say I still stick with the 73%. I would say it's better to fight now rather than later, at least talking about that particular scenario. With a situation like China, it's way better to wait that one out because there's a lot of bad things that could happen if we don't wait that out. With Russia, though, the bad things that would happen later are the same bad the bad things that would happen right now are the same bad things that would happen later. So it's either we're dealing with this now or we're dealing with it later, and it's probably going to be worse in some forms later. So I'd say that it would be a lot better, especially if we see that the Ukrainians are rapidly losing the war, that we got involved right then and there, because the Russians can say whatever they want, just like Hitler did. Hitler said that after he got the Sudetenland in the Czech Republic, he wasn't going to get any more land, and that was it, and that was clearly a lie. Putin has made it incredibly clear through multiple statements in India, in Russia, and elsewhere, just over the past few months, really over the past month, that they have ambitions well beyond Ukraine, and that they are going to secure those one way or another in the future. We are not going to sit around and let Polish children and women and innocent civilians and Estonian or Latvian or Lithuanian or Finnish men, women, and children and innocents get slaughtered needlessly like those poor people in Ukraine currently are right now. Those battlefields will never exist because we're going to bring the war to them, not to us. If the Russian people are too blind and too spineless to stand up against their own government, then their cities can be the battlefields, but it's not going to be ours. And I would rather say that the war and its suffering should be as far away from our people and our alliance as it can possibly be, and that's why I'd say that if the Ukrainians are losing, I'd rather not let more innocents suffer like the ones who have suffered needlessly in Ukraine. It should stop right then and there, and we should get involved if the Ukrainians are losing, because that war is going to reach us sometime sooner or later, and I'd rather say it be later by our own intervention. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Ed, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, Ed, for that support as well. He said, Irish Ed Patriot here. And question,
Hey!
why does Putin and the current administration not know everything the LSA does? And we know what's going on, and why?
I just don't know. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people watch the show, and we're very honored that they do. And it's a lot of people that are kind of on up there, or at least retired that used to be on up there. But they don't watch, apparently. I mean, if they watched, you know, they could have taken some tips, like on the whole Thailand and Cambodia deal and everything else, and the Pakistan-India deal. You know, probably a lot better foreign policy decisions would have been made then, rather than what was made. But, you know, I guess they just don't. They're not that interested in YouTube, I guess. Maybe they think it's below them or something. I'm not sure. But a big thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a $5 support from Leafstow. And thank you very much, Leafstow, as well. They said, good morning, LSA.
And good morning to you, and good morning to the whole of the LSA, and I hope that you're doing well, and a massive thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Plazov, who puts in a $2 support. And thank you very much, Plazov, for that support as well. And we do appreciate that, as always, very, very much. And it's now time, folks, to move on to our live chat questions proper. But first of all, though, our Morse code is the exact same one as it was last night. So a big shout out to the Morse code decoders once again for cracking that one. Even though it was the same, they got easy work tonight. They just got to get the same one. But thank y'all very much for cracking that code. But moving into our live chat questions, our first one is going to go to Steve. And Steve said, do you think the bridge would be more vulnerable now? And I'm referring to the Kerch Bridge, the infamous.
It's pretty, honestly, it's pretty well defended. Crazily enough, they've defended it insanely, more so than most everything else in Russia. And so I'd have to say it probably wouldn't be that easy to hit it, and also it's just not that important of a target anymore. That's why even the Ukrainians have lost interest in hitting it again, is because one, it would be really hard to hit it, and two, it doesn't really have even that much impact anymore on how the war is really going. But that's what I would have to say, and I hope that does address that well. And before we move on into our next live chat, folks, I actually saw a lot of people, and I know that we already covered the poll and kind of covered this earlier, but I actually wanted to show y'all something a little bit interesting, because a lot of people say that the words warrior and so on are included.
Oh, no.
I got it.
Man, we got to get some questions. We got to get some questions.
I know, but I have to show this to folks because this is something a lot of people may not know. The Soldier's Creed was different up until 2003, and this is what the Soldier's Creed used to be right here. I'm not going to read it off, but notice that it never mentions the word warrior. It is only soldier. I'm an American soldier, so on and so forth. Yada yada yada. It's not I'm a warrior. It's got a whole different sort of an aura to it. This is very professional sounding. It sounds like you're taking an oath to defend the Republic. This sounds like you're taking an oath to defend the tribe from Ooga Booga clan across the way in the other cave.
I think you're getting obsessed with it, man. I think people might have had this one.
I'm just saying, all right? I'm just saying. But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
Also, by the way, sorry, Talos Auditor, I did miss your super chat, by the way. A big shout out to Talos Auditor for that 5 Australian. And they said, waiting for Ukraine to flamingo the subs in St. Petersburg. And they said they want more sub counts, and there's like 60 or so.
Man, honestly, I can't wait to see them hitting some with flamingos. Honestly, every naval base in Western Russia is within range of a flamingo, save for a few. So they actually could hit Kronstadt with that and probably do a good bit of damage. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best that we can. And with that, a huge thanks to you once again for the support. And we're on to the next one.
And our next live chat question is going to go to none other than Triberium, who said, could the Soviets also be afraid that Turkey will get involved now that they hit 2 to 3 Turkish ships in Ukrainian ports?
It doesn't really seem like the Turks are wanting to get involved. They basically ignored that and haven't even made a government statement from what I know. So I don't think the Turks are going to get involved. I think they're trying to play their hand the Turkish way, which is to play both sides as best they can. So with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. And a big thanks to you for asking. A really good question, actually. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And this one goes to Delathor, who said, can you quickly elaborate on Russia and China's relationship to Cambodia and that conflict?
Cambodia. So we actually can talk about that a little bit. Russia has very little of a running relationship currently with Cambodia. During the times of the Soviet Union, basically every communist country tried to assist the others. Although Russia and China, well, the Soviet Union and China hated each other back then and kind of do now. But in the modern day, Cambodia generally leans more so on the Chinese for foreign support. The Chinese like the Cambodians because it allows for them to have a group of aligned countries within Southeast Asia that, at least in spirit, support the Chinese. They provide no economic or strategic value, but it does give them the kind of strength in numbers that the Chinese like to talk about on the global stage. So the Cambodians really only exist generally as a Chinese ally in name. The Chinese provide very little equipment to the Cambodians, and they provide very little support to them, and there's hardly an economic relationship to be had. It's big to the Cambodians, but on the international sense, it's peanuts on the large scale. So that's basically the relations between the Russians, Chinese, and the Cambodians, and Russia pretty much plays no role in modern Cambodian relations in any way. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to none other than AF Kaplan, who said, if U.S. forces do intervene with a ship off the coast of Venezuela, if that is part of the Russian Shadow Fleet, what effect will that have on U.S. attempts to negotiate with Russia?
That's a good question. If they tried to seize that ship in particular that's alleged to be a Russian shadow tanker, that could start to sour U.S. relations with Russia. The Russians would probably try and publicly ignore it and not make any statements directly to the United States. But one thing that they are going to do is that they are definitely going to become a lot more hardball on peace deals from that point forward, which they're already doing. So they'll just dig in and keep on with that position and never give up. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, at least the best I can, in my opinion. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Mason Miami, who said, are we going to fly a plastic Santa Claus over Venezuela on Christmas, like an extension of the NORAD Santa tracker thing? Honestly, Mason Miami, you got to remember that Venezuela doesn't have a NORAD tracking system. They have nothing like that. They use Flight Radar 24, which is publicly available ADS-B information. But to Flight Radar 24's credit, though, they also install receivers all over the place and they actually send them out, and they crowdsource the information. So it's pretty cool. But Venezuela apparently relies on that system of ADS-B information to see when planes are coming into their airspace. So if a plane is not squawking on the transponder, then they can't see it. So unless Santa Claus has a transponder installed on the sled, then they're not going to see it coming. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say, they better be looking at Flight Radar 24 and that thing better have a transponder. They're going to miss it. Like, if they don't, like, Matthew's right on that. I would say it would be cool to do, but we'd either have to have that thing lit the F up with lights for them to see it, or it'd have to be on Flight Radar. Otherwise, they're just going to miss the whole thing. But I hope that does address it the best we can. And also, Venezuelan airspace right now, folks, is literally completely empty. The whole airspace. Nothing within the NOTAM area, which also extends a good bit into the Caribbean. So, very interesting with that. Nothing is here. It's nighttime. Well, actually, it's more so getting towards the early morning over there.
You know, the funny thing is, I don't think they're going to get a visit from Santa Claus, unless you consider Santa Claus an F-16 pilot with wearing like a Santa hat or something and yelling out the window, "Take this, you ho-ho." Unless you consider that to be Santa, I don't think they're getting a visit from him.
Man, I don't think so. Honestly, man, bro. Dude, they're going to sit there and hear, man, like a radio get dropped. It's going to be, Santa Claus is coming to town. And then they're going to hear some stuff blowing up in the distance. It's going to be like a horror movie at that point. They'll be like, oh, God. But, man, anyways, with that, we are moving on to the third to last question of the night. See, folks, we actually did get a decent amount of live chats tonight.
Getting a good number. And this one right here is going to go to none other than AF Kaplan, who said, any new developments regarding the EU releasing frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine? And yes, good news on that, AF Kaplan. They have seized it, or, well, they've permanently disabled or immobilized the funds in their own words, which means they've permanently seized it. The next step, though, the big step, is we need liquidation. We need liquidity. We want liquidity in our portfolio because we need to be able to give some of that liquid cash so Ukraine can buy some of those good weapons, or at least Europe can buy weapons for Ukraine using that good cash that Russia desperately needs. But I hear through the grapevine that Europe will be deciding on liquidation over the next week. So maybe we'll hear something. But Enforcer, what say you?
I have to protest. I will not let the funds get liquidated. Shut up. Like, shut up, Orban. It doesn't involve you. But beyond that, it is going to be liquidated here probably really soon from what we're hearing. And Matthew is correct. It has been permanently immobilized, at least for now. The European Union has basically seized the funds. It's just not to liquidation yet. So that's what we know at the moment. So I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Catalyst Destiny, who said, so the question now is, did Putin order this self-blockade of the Novorossyisk port, or did some commander at the port do it, and then Putin will find out later about what the hell even happened?
Oh, he didn't order it. This fell within most likely the let's see, what the hell are they called? The Southern Military District's area of responsibility. So that most likely went to the Southern, actually they either went to the Black Sea Fleet Admiral in charge of the Black Sea Fleet, or it went to the Southern Military District's commander for final approval. That's most likely the highest level that it went to, because smaller decision, like, that seems like a major decision, but in the reality of things for Russia, that's actually probably a more of a smaller time decision at the moment. That probably didn't go all the way up to Putin. That probably stopped at the military district's authority and didn't go any farther than there. Because generally the Southern Military District is charged with the day-to-day dealings of strategic and tactical decisions. Well, more so tactical decisions, honestly, that have to be made to achieve an objective. The strategic decisions, however, are generally bumped on up to the MOD in Moscow, and then that's when Putin generally has some insight on it, and even still, it's more so advisory than it is direct control over the situation. So, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least with how the politics of the Russian military works these days, or how that would have been done. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Ryan Peacock. And he said, didn't Ukraine get permission to use weapons from the USA for long-range attacks? And if so, those ships are just sitting ducks for missiles like the Scalp from the French.
Generally they did, but we believe that may have been rescinded at some point later on, because there was a lot of confused reports that come out, and it may have happened, it may have not happened, and if it did, it may have been rescinded. We're not really sure, because we've seen that the Ukrainians are conducting long-range attacks against Russian ships, but we're not really sure if that's with the US's blessing or not. It may be, it may not be, we just don't really know. But generally we did hear that some approval was given in the past, and there's been some rumors that it may have been rescinded, but we've never gotten confirmation of that. So generally, they are sitting ducks. And also, the Russian Navy's never been off the menu. Generally, the long-range strikes on the oil tankers was what was believed to have been off the menu and is now approved. But attacks on Russian naval vessels, wherever they may be, has never been off of the table. Even in the last administration, attacks against Russian ships in Sevastopol and Novorossyisk. And not only that, even crazily enough, one time in Baltisk actually did happen. If y'all don't remember, that was a cool story to round the stream off on. There was a small patrol vessel. It was, I believe, one of these, actually, in class, and a Ukrainian intelligence officer, actually two of them, they just hopped on the boat with a Molotov, threw it right into the main computer frame of the vessel, and then walked out, burned down the whole main computer of the vessel that ran the weapons control systems, and basically rendered the ship inoperable until that computer was replaced. So that was a pretty cool attack. Not a conventional one at all, but really cool nonetheless. But with that, I hope that does answer that question incredibly well, and it's time for us to round out this stream for the night, folks. I've got to say that we're entirely honored and massively appreciative to have had all of y'all here. It's a real honor to know that 14.6 thousand people came here to this stream tonight, and 111,000 people have watched this stream before it ended. We thank you all so much once again for watching, and if there is a huge amount of news tomorrow in the middle of the day, you can expect a short war summary to be made by none other than yours truly, the Enforcer. And if there isn't any major news to cover in the middle of the day, then y'all will see us at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news from around the world. And so with that, folks, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, Ram Slava, long live the Lee Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And with that, folks, thank you all for joining us once again tonight. And a huge shout out to the 111,000 people that chose us as their news source tonight. And we appreciate and are honored that all of you chose us as your news source. And we will see you all tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern for the next Nightly War News stream, and midday as well for that short war video if there is enough news to cover. And once again, it is wild to see that at 12 p.m. Mountain Time, or 1 a.m. Central Time, maybe, possibly. I'm not good at that, but there's so many people are still here. Over 7,000 people are still here this late in the night. A 4-hour stream. Y'all are still sticking around. That's really, truly a trooper sticking around for that long, by the way. But in the meantime, folks, we'll see y'all tomorrow. And of course, Slava Ukraine, Hiram Slava. Get some rest and good night.
Stand up, come.